Hello there, welcome to Steeples and Steel episode 2, and today we're going to be talking about one of the more infamous characters in all of history, Rasputin. And as the title slide of this presentation suggests, is he a mad genius, is he a manipulator, or is he a moron? We're going to find out in today's episode of Steeples and Steel, and I just wanted to take a minute and kind of lay a few ground rules for Rasputin that we're probably not going to see anywhere else. Number one, just parental advisory. There are going to be some subjects that we're talking about with Rasputin. He had a very X-rated life, and so there are going to be things we're going to discuss or talk about that are kind of a little bit disturbing. I tried to go through and make sure that we're not going to be covering gorish or disgusting or perverted details, but there is no complete look at Rasputin's life without looking at some of the crazy, bizarre, and just inappropriate things that he did. And so that's something just to kind of keep in mind, that we are going to be covering some things that are very very wrong, very inappropriate, and he just was a very almost bipolar individual, I would say, in some areas. And so one thing just to keep in mind with Rasputin is that, and so just kind of as a parental advisory, if any little children are listening, or anybody that's younger, I would definitely recommend listening with a parent. The other thing I would say is this: with Rasputin, the more research I did into his life and his story, because we talk about him briefly when I was a history teacher and I was teaching history of Civ, we would cover him briefly, but I spent probably a good 2 or 3 weeks delving into the life of Rasputin. And the one thing that you kind of realize really quickly is, with Rasputin, the myth and the legend have become the history of the person, probably more so than any other person I've ever seen. And it's almost impossible to separate the myth from the person of Rasputin. So for every article I would look at that says, oh, he did this, there'd be another article that would say, oh, no, he didn't do this. Or there was, there's no way he would ever do this in public, or there's no way he ever would act like this. And then you see another article that's like, oh, he did that all the time. And so just keep in mind, unfortunately, you're going to see, because he was a very reviled individual by the time of his death, he does become a person that people like to use as kind of a punching bag. And unfortunately for his history, he brought a lot of this on himself. And so I can't really feel too bad for him, but in other ways, it does seem like he was kind of a target, because it was the best way to get at the royal family of Russia without actually getting at them personally. So keep this in mind as we talk through it. You're going to see kind of a crazy, crazy story here today. And I just wanted to kind of mention with this that there are a lot of things that we really don't know. And for every source that says, oh, Rasputin did this or said this or acted this way, there's another source, sometimes even the next page or the next article down or the next book, that will say, oh no, Rasputin never did this, he never said this, he never would have acted this way. And unfortunately for him, or fortunately for him, I don't know how he would view it, but his reputation and his legend, the urban legend of Rasputin, has become the reality. One thing that I do think is fascinating is he's often portrayed today as just sheer evil, sheer demonic. He's often portrayed as a villain. There's been a lot of movies that portray him as a villain. There's been a lot of TV shows or documentaries that portray him as just pure evil, and there is some of that, but when you take a look at the life of Rasputin, you're going to see that he's just as human as any of us, but then there are parts of him or facets of him that even today are unexplainable. Did he have a connection with God or a connection with the occult? And it's so weird to kind of say that on the opposite sides of things, but you'll see as we kind of go through this that he is unique in a way that not many people were in this time period. And I think that's one of the reasons why he is today such a controversial figure. I did want to mention real quickly here, when I was teaching history, this was always a lecture that was super exciting, because students would always perk up and pay attention, and definitely, I remember sometimes when we would talk through the story of his death, that people would just be kind of enraptured and enthralled with it. He is a very fascinating character, and I wanted to mention that this I kind of got to thinking about this from one of my old students, Mia, who was a big fan and did a paper on Rasputin and had done some research herself. And we had gotten to talking a while ago, and it just kind of stuck in my head. I was like, I need to actually do some more research on Rasputin. And whenever I decided to put this together, kind of doing some podcast slash lecture slash however this is going to work, Rasputin was one that came to mind. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today. I'm gonna try to go fairly quickly, but I do want to talk through the idea of Rasputin. A mad genius? Was he a manipulator? Or was he a moron? And when we get to the end, I want you guys to make up your minds, and feel free to drop in the comments what your thoughts are, what you think of him. But the jury still is out on a lot of his life. But just to show you this picture really quickly here, you can see Rasputin in the nursery with the royal family, and you can see all 5 of the children are there, the Tsarina is there, and then the governess is there as well. And it's actually not this picture necessarily, but it's kind of some of the stuff he does that really gets him in some hot water, and we'll talk about that more in just a bit. Grigory Rasputin is going to be born in modern-day Siberia. This picture is the Rasputin Museum. It was built over where his house was. His actual house that he lived in is no longer there. He would have lived from 1869 to 1916. So he dies relatively young. He's only, I'm double-checking here, I want to say he's only 47 when he dies. And so, that's going to be something that kind of adds to his myth and the craziness surrounding him as well. So he is going to basically live in the middle of kind of nowhere, and Siberia was often viewed in the minds of most Russians, and even today by many people, is viewed as kind of a dumping ground. It's very inhospitable. The winters are incredibly long. The sun, it seems like never comes up. It's for a very short time in the winters, and then oftentimes it was a place either viewed as like a giant walk-in freezer or a giant walk-in prison. If you had people and you didn't know what to do with them, you would ship them off to Siberia, work them to death, or they just freeze and die. But he is going to live in Siberia and is going to end up working his way over to St. Petersburg, which was the capital of Russia originally. And then he is going to be born, and I do apologize, I'm going to try my best to do pronunciations. I did do some looking up and everything, but if I butcher these, I do apologize. But he is born in Praskovia, Russia, and Tyumen Oblast, or kind of like a state, which would be in modern-day Siberia. His house is where his house was, has been turned into a museum in Praskovia, and I did some looking around. I couldn't find a whole lot of pictures of what the city looks like now. From what I can tell, it's very similar to how you would expect kind of a Siberian town to look even now. And just to show you, this is kind of the inside of his house or museum going in. And one thing that I thought was super fascinating is, for those of you who are big music fans, the group Boney M, who does the song Ra Ra Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, which has become so famous because of Reels and Just Dance and other things like that. They actually came and visited, which I thought was really impressive. They did come and do some research on Rasputin, and if any of you have listened to the song, it is super catchy. There are parts of it that are accurate, and then there are parts of it that are pretty inaccurate, but the song is definitely an earworm and is very, very catchy even now. So not much is really known about his early life, or for that matter, most of his life. The one thing that is really fascinating is the more research people have done on Rasputin, his life kind of really becomes almost like a black hole, especially early on. What we do know is a couple of things about him. This is going to be the area where he was born, and you can see it's where Russia kind of turns into the Asian part. You have the Ural Mountains, and then west of that is considered Europe, and then you would have the east of that would be considered Asia. And you can see where the star is on the map. That's going to be roughly where Rasputin was born, and you can see it would be north of modern-day Kazakhstan, which would have been a part of Russia at the time. But truly, when Rasputin is growing up, he is in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And I do apologize here, but I wanted to show you the oblast, or the county that he was in as well, and that kind of got covered up a little bit. My apologies on that. Rasputin's hometown in 1912, you can see there's not a lot there. A lot of farming. They said that there was a tavern and a church, and that was about it. There really wasn't much to do. And Rasputin is kind of known early on as kind of a troublemaker. He's known as a horse thief. And then also he had the ability to cure bleeding in horses as well. So even at an early age, Rasputin's already kind of known as this character who seems to have these mystical powers. Almost... in a way where he's just kind of considered like he'd get drunk and be a rabble-rouser, but then he also, he would run around stealing horses, but then he also was known if a horse had bleeding or issues or got kicked and was internal bleeding, that he could somehow heal the bleeding on the horse. And so what ends up happening is Rasputin really becomes kind of known as just a ruffian in his town for most of his growing up years. And then just to show you, he does have two siblings, which I thought was really interesting, but both are going to die of drowning. One of his daughters. One of his sisters is going to die of drowning. He's also going to end up saving his older brother from drowning, but then the brother ends up catching pneumonia and dies. And so Rasputin pretty much is going to be kind of an only child growing up, and just, kind of keeps to himself a lot, and is just really, really, once again, I imagine these deaths do have to weigh on him pretty deeply, especially the fact that he saves his brother from drowning, but then his brother is going to end up dying anyway due to the pneumonia. I'm sure this weighs on Rasputin quite deeply. One thing that I think we often forget about is with modern medicine, we are so blessed to have this. The ability to... a lot of diseases that would have gotten a lot of us, or a lot of farming accidents or things that would have happened to us if we lived in the 1850s, those things are gone by and large, not nearly on the same scale that it used to be. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind is not just in Russia, but everywhere in this time period, death was a very, very common presence. It was not up until, I want to say, the 1850s, where less than half of kids would die by their 10th birthday. Like, it was pretty much half of kids would die by their 10th birthday up until the 1850s from whether diseases, getting run over, kicked by a horse or a cow, or whatever it was. And it was not until vaccines and modern medicine and just better hygiene and just not drinking out of rivers that have sewage dumped into them kind of thing, where death is really going to be a very, I don't want to say a friend, but it is a very, very common presence. So much so that if you ever read Victorian era writings about death, or you read about, you're like, man, these people are so they're so down all the time, or they're always so, kind of morose, or just really kind of always talking about death. It was just very, very common. And that's something that I think is really going to affect Rasputin deeply, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. He is going to marry a woman by the name of Praskovia, and I'm going to butcher this, Dubrovina, at the age of 19. He's going to have 7 children with her. 4 of them are going to end up dying in childhood. One of them, his daughter, is going to be named Maria, and he actually names 2 of his kids after his siblings that end up dying, which is a really kind of a fascinating part of Rasputin's life. That he's going to name his kids after his siblings. And what ends up happening is 4 of them are going to end up dying in childhood, and this may have influenced Rasputin and what he does next. He is basically going to end up kind of just bouncing, and you can see here's a picture of him with his kids, and I don't know if these are the 3 that survived. I would assume most likely, but this is a picture of him with his 3 children. And you can see, they did live in pretty impoverished circumstances, but they are, for all things considered, pretty well taken care of. I don't know if there was an event in his life that's really going to kind of push him over the edge. Rasputin always claimed that one day he's out plowing and he sees an image of the Virgin Mary. And basically she tells him to become kind of a wanderer and to basically to follow her. Whether or not he sees that, he believes that he sees it, and that's what matters. And so Rasputin is going to end up basically kind of leaving his family behind, and just for a couple of years, 2 to 3 years at minimum, is going to wander all throughout Siberia. And you can see this is a picture of him surrounded by a bunch of adoring women, and then the one that is circled right here is going to be his wife. and she is actually going to come over to St. Petersburg when he's there every once in a while and be with him. And then here is his daughter, Maria. She's actually going to end up working her way over to America and becoming a lion tamer, which sounds so on brand for a Rasputin. And she is going to vigorously defend her father from all critics. And some of it, I'm sure, is the fact that she's his daughter, and then some of it, I do think, as well, is just the fact that she wants to preserve his legacy, and keep in mind, once again, some of it may be that he acted completely differently around his family than he did, obviously, when he's by himself. I'm sure there's some of that as well, but what ends up happening is his daughter and his wife are going to be with him here, and then he's surrounded by a bunch of adoring nobility women as well. He's going to end up becoming a holy man, and this was not unheard of, especially in the Russian Orthodox Church. It was very common for people to become kind of a holy man, and contrary to popular belief, he is never actually going to become a monk. He does meet up with a guy that kind of instructs him and actually takes him into a monastery, but Rasputin doesn't, and this is key and crucial here, he does not want to give up the pleasures of this life. So he really wants to kind of have his cake and eat it too, and he cannot imagine becoming a monk and being celibate and just being kind of shut up in a monastery. That life is not for him. He leaves, and he's going to claim that there's all sorts of homosexual practices that are going on in the monastery. I don't know if that's true or not. That may have just been an excuse for him to get out, but that's what he's going to end up saying. And he's going to become a holy man or a starets, and is going to kind of travel around. And he also becomes known as a strannik or a wanderer as well. And they talked about that it was not uncommon for people to do this pretty often, especially in Russia, where you just disappear for months at a time. And you would do all these things to try to earn favor with God. And part of me wonders, let me go back up here, with Rasputin, I do wonder if he really is trying super hard to maybe understand why 4 of my kids have died, why 2 of my siblings are dead, and really is trying to understand life and death and all of the things that come with it. But what ends up happening, of course, as you can imagine, is he's going to wander all over Russia. He ends up in Mount Athos, and then he is going to visit Jerusalem, but that's going to be later on in his life. All in all, he's a holy wanderer for about 8 years. And the story is told that he actually comes back home after 2 to 3 years, and his wife actually serves him, because it was not uncommon for traveling pilgrims to come through. She serves him and doesn't even realize it's her own husband until he opens his mouth and talks. And so this is going to be... Rasputin basically becomes kind of this holy man. But keep in mind, he never actually is going to become a monk, like people have often made him out to be. Then one thing that is really interesting, and I guess this is something that is kind of shows you the dichotomy of Rasputin here. He was known as a kind of a jolly individual, had a good sense of humor, but whenever he's in front of the cameras, he always adopts the serious pose, the hand on the shirt or in the chest, and always kind of portrays himself as this super serious, super holy man of God. And so you can see kind of picture after picture, and then just the eyes, almost kind of that hypnotic stare is something that fascinates. You can see even through the pictures of 100 years ago, he had a stare that was kind of mesmerizing. And you can see there's just a couple of different pictures of him here throughout the years. But I guess to Rasputin's fault, what shows on the cameras in the pictures is just kind of him being serious and sober, but he never, the sense of humor that he had doesn't really shine through in any pictures that are taken of him. Another thing as well, and we'll talk about this more, but supposedly he had teeth that were black stumps, and that was another reason why he never opened his mouth. He didn't want to show his blackened stumps. I had a person that I worked with growing up that he had teeth like that, and it was, whenever he would laugh or talk, it was very noticeable. And so I wonder if that's something that he did. Rasputin, just to kind of keep people from noticing his mouth. Josephine, Napoleon's wife, she was famous for that, where she loved raw sugarcane so much that it just destroyed her teeth, and she would have a fan with her whenever she would smile or chuckle. She would often hold the fan up in front of her mouth so that people couldn't see her blackened stumps of teeth. So Rasputin's not the first one to do this, but it just kind of adds to his mystique, I guess. But when he comes back home, he is changed. for better or for worse, he does really start to kind of become a whole lot different of a person, and he's almost revered as this holy man figure. Before, he's kind of a ruffian. He's, the teenager who's running around causing mischief and stealing people's animals, or just, kind of just overall just kind of being a nuisance. And then once he finds religion, he is going to change, and he views himself as a man of God. One thing that I do think is interesting, and this is maybe kind of a look into Rasputin's life, is he basically says, despite all my flaws, I am Christ in miniature. Which is wild, because as you're going to see, some of the stuff he does has nothing to do with how Christ acted at all, but he is going to view himself as a Christ in miniature, which is just crazy to hear him say. Couple of different things that are interesting here. He would often wear shackles on his wrists in his wanderings. It was not uncommon for him to bind his hands. I think he could have bound his feet as well, and is just going to wander throughout the woods. And this was, once again, was not uncommon. Even at one point, Ivan the Terrible. He was great at being terrible, but Ivan the Terrible is going to wander through the woods of Russia for a couple of years, and this was not something that was unheard of. I think one thing that you have to take a look at when you're looking at Rasputin is you can't look at it through the lens of Western culture, and you definitely can't look at it at the lens of modern day culture. You're going to be kind of puzzled every time you look at the Rasputin's life, or the life of people in Russia in general, because Russian history is just, it doesn't operate on the same way that European history does, or American history does, or Western history for that matter. So he'd often wear shackles on his wrists in his wanderings. He would often not change his underwear for up to 6 months at a time. To me, that is incredibly disgusting. I know you're in Russia, but still, I imagine, being out in the summer in Russia, I know it's probably, Siberia can probably get quite hot, but I just cannot imagine not changing your underwear for up to 6 months at a time. And this was not something that people were digging in and found out about. This was something he would brag about. And I don't know if this is something that he thought was going to bring him closer to God. It feels very medieval, this idea of torturing myself in order to earn more brownie points with God. He would often have bits of food in his beard and hair. That was something that people even in St. Petersburg talked about. It was not uncommon for him to carry bits of food around in his hair. And then he would often eat his food with his hands. He would rip bread with his hands. He would eat anything that was, wasn't a spoon based food. He would eat it with his hands and not with utensils. That was something that many people kind of commented on, noticing that Rasputin would eat his food with his hands and not with utensils. And then this picture, to me, kind of encapsulates Rasputin as a person. He had those hypnotic eyes, and I thought this was really interesting too. The research that I was doing, everybody says that Rasputin had blue eyes, but then I did see as well that people talked about that he had yellow eyes. Some people said that his eyes were brown, and so from the consensus I could gather was his eyes were blue. But even people that were looking at him, I guess, said that I don't know if he could change his eye color. If he could, that is truly next level. But he had blue eyes that he could dilate like a cat at will. And people often said it was like staring at a snake, like his gaze was just hypnotic. And there's story after story. And keep in mind, this is looking back. I don't know how it was at the moment, but people would say that when he would stare at you, it was almost like he could communicate telepathically with you, or that he would know what you're thinking when he locked eyes with you. And if that is the case, that truly is fascinating, and is also incredibly creepy. But just looking at him right here in this picture just makes you, I don't know, it seems like it's just kind of almost that hypnotic gaze and that stare is really fascinating. And also that he could dilate his pupils like a cat. I've never heard of that with a person, but he could do that at will, which is just beyond fascinating. His hair was also known for being greasy, as you can imagine. I mean, if he's got bits of food in it, that's going to be pretty common as well. And then he smelled like a goat, according to most people that were around him. He just really, truly smelled kind of awful, didn't bathe much at all, and just was kind of a wild man. And so people often kind of said that he smelled really, really bad. We already kind of talked about the teeth being black and rotting stumps, but people said his breath was horrible. So I'm going to assume, I don't know, but I'm going to assume that Rasputin probably had minimum or no dental hygiene at all. Probably just ate, never really bothered to brush his teeth or rinse his mouth out or anything. And so I would assume that all of this kind of combines to really really just kind of like, this person is somebody that I wouldn't want to be spending a whole lot of time with. But as you're going to see in Russia, especially before the communist revolution, things are completely different over there. He would lick serving spoons before giving them to others, and he would wipe hands on the tablecloth. So, for example, and of course this isn't probably not going to be a Russian dish, but if it was like a ladle with mac and cheese in it, he would lick all the mac and cheese out of the spoon, front and back, before he would give it to other people, and then he would also wipe his hands on the tablecloth as well. So he really is kind of your country bumpkin when he comes to St. Petersburg. However, the one thing that really seems to endear him to a lot of people there is he does not care what people think about him when he first shows up. Doesn't matter, doesn't bother him. And so what ends up happening is he really kind of becomes this oddity and exotic, and that's what attracts a lot of people to him. The other thing that's going to be play in his favor is I really do think with Rasputin it's kind of right place, right time. He is going to be kind of considered a holy man, or kind of, like we mentioned, a wanderer. And so the Russian Orthodox Church is full of holy men, in Russian history. There's going to be this idea of actually a holy fool, and it was based on 1 Corinthians 3:18 through 19. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. So this idea of being a holy fool is actually going to be very common in the Russian Orthodox Church. And it was almost this idea of you're kind of basically being that, you're basically kind of showing people how stupid they are, and that only God is the one who can judge you, and you're being a fool for Christ. You have Saint Basil, who is known as a Eurodivi, which is a holy fool for Christ, and he's going to be kind of the most famous. During the reign of Ivan the Terrible, there's a couple of crazy stories about him. It was not uncommon for him to wander through the streets of Moscow, which is where Ivan is going to be, naked, whether it was in the middle of the winter or whether it was in the summer. And there's story after story of him like surviving, winters that would have killed anybody else that's out there with, snow jacket and boots and everything. And he is just going to sleep in hallways and porches, and he would often go in and confront Ivan the Terrible to his face about all of his sins. He would kind of rage at him about all the blood that he had spilled, and Ivan he actually sends an order out that he is to be protected. Nobody is to bother him. And I do wonder sometimes with these holy fools that they're almost maybe viewed as a court jester, where they can get away with stuff that if anybody else does it, they're maybe looked at as wanting to take the throne over. Ivan the Terrible was known for doing this, where he would just bail out into the woods for a couple of years and see if anybody seized the throne, and if they did, he'd come back and wipe them off the face of the earth. And gotta love Russian history. And so what ends up happening is Saint Basil would come in, and he would do this. There's one time where he's talking to Ivan, and Ivan offers him a glass of wine, and he's like, "Oh, thanks," and dumps it on the floor. And then he offers him another glass of wine, and he's like, "Oh, thanks," dumps it on the floor. And then the third glass that Ivan offers him, he's about to dump it on the floor, and Ivan says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "There's a fire in Novgorod, which is the second biggest city of Russia at the time, and I'm putting it out." And word came later that people had seen a naked man running through the city putting out the flames in Novgorod, and it just kind of adds to the legend of Saint Basil. I don't know if that's true or not, but he is going to be known as kind of one of the best known holy fools, so much so that when he dies, Saint Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, which is still there today, is going to be built in his honor. And as you can see, Ivan spared no expense on this. There's the rumor that supposedly he had the chief architect's eyes put out so that he wouldn't design a more beautiful building. That seems to be an urban legend, but St. Basil's is incredibly beautiful. One of the things that's interesting is on the outside, it looks kind of almost better than it does on the inside. You can see it's almost... maybe not finished is the right word, but you can see it's brick on one side and then it's kind of painted over on the other side. I thought that was really fascinating. So this is kind of the interior of St. Basil's Cathedral. And Ivan builds this because he wants Moscow to be the new Jerusalem and have people come here on pilgrimage. It's mildly successful with Russian Orthodoxy, yes, but with, Christianity as a whole, not really. I mean, Ivan the Terrible's behavior, and that's a story for another time, kind of keeps a lot of people away. But here's a picture of the interior of St. Basil's Cathedral. And then here's another picture as well. Let's talk through a few more holy fools. The Russian Church considers 36 of them to be saints in their canon, and so Russian Orthodoxy is going to have 36 of them that are listed as holy fools. You have Saint Procopius. He's actually going to come over from Germany. He is so enamored by Russian Orthodoxy, he converts, and then, as I mentioned here, kind of similar to Saint Basil, he's going to sleep on porches, he's going to wander barefoot in tattered clothes, and then he saves the town of Ustug, and I apologize if I butchered that, from a lightning or meteorite storm that devastated the nearby area. Apparently, he runs in about a week before the storm happens, saying that you need to repent. We're going to go up like Sodom and Gomorrah if you don't do anything, and the whole town is going to kind of repent and ends up getting saved from this lightning and meteorite storm. And so Saint Procopius is going to be kind of go down in history as a legend in this area. And then here's a picture of what he would have looked like, and he's kind of the St. Procopius of Ustug, kind of the patron saint there. And then St. Zena of Petersburg, St. Petersburg, is going to be what probably her and St. Basil are going to be two of the most famous of the holy fools of the Russian Orthodox Church. She's going to live around the time of Napoleon, and after her husband dies, she's going to wander the streets dressed in red and green after her husband's death. And there are different versions of the story. Some say that she dressed in men's clothes for the rest of her life and only would be called by her husband's name. But she's going to be known as kind of a famous holy fool as well. And even today, people say that visiting her grave is going to bring healing and then practical solutions to problems that pilgrims have. Things like how do I save my marriage? How do I do that kind of stuff? There's stories of Saint Zena appearing to people and saying, this is what you need to do in order to not get divorced. And she's going to be very popular even today in the Russian Orthodox Church. Here's a picture of Saint Zena. And then here's where she is buried, and people will still go here on pilgrimage. And just to show you kind of the inside of where she's buried at the crypt, it's not uncommon to build mausoleums in the Russian Orthodox Church to the saints, and that's a very, very common kind of practice. So the other thing that's going to be really interesting as well is this idea of the occult in Russia. And once again, it seems so kind of opposites, where Christianity, and you have the holy fools, and you have the wandering pilgrims, and you have the saints, but also the occult is going to be big as well. And there's going to be a lot of especially in St. Petersburg, the interest in the occult is at an all-time high. Excuse me, and one of the reasons for that is there's this idea of mysticism and just connection to the spirit world. And there's this guy by the name of Nizir Philippe, who is going to be a supposed healer and a miracle worker. And the story goes he could supposedly summon lightning, and that he also was good with magnetism. So much so that he becomes an advisor to Nicholas II in Alexandria, the royal, the Tsar and the Tsarina, in 1901. He claims, and this is a little bit of a spoiler for what lies ahead here, they want a son. They have a bunch of daughters, and they need a son to kind of keep the line going. And so he is going to claim that he can change the gender of the child in the womb, and if she has a daughter, he'll change it to a son. And what is going to end up happening is, unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately for him, she's going to have a fifth pregnancy that lasts 9 months with all of the symptoms. The only other person I've ever heard this with was Bloody Mary of England, where she wants a child so bad that her body basically tricks itself into thinking that she's pregnant. I don't know if Alexandra was in the same scenario where she wants a son so bad that her body tricks itself into thinking that it's pregnant. But she has a molar pregnancy, and the baby is going to die at about a month. But the thing that was really kind of fascinating, and not to get into all the nitty gritty here, but she doesn't have any periods at all during the time of this pregnancy, so it seems like everything's still going. Her body is going to get bigger, and so it seems like the baby is growing. And then after 9 months go by, it's pretty obvious that nothing's going to happen, and the royal family has to kind of issue a bulletin saying that she has had a miscarriage. And this kind of doesn't go well with the populace, especially the media of the time. The media was very similar to how it was with Louis XVI of France. Very antagonistic sometimes. And so what ends up happening is she's going to end up miscarrying the 1 month molar baby about 10 months into the pregnancy. It's kind of unusual because most of the time the body often tends to you have to get rid of all of the material inside quickly, or you can end up having sepsis, or basically infection from within. And so in this case, the fact that she doesn't have sepsis to me is kind of remarkable, considering she carried this molar pregnancy, which never would have had a chance to actually be a baby anyway, unfortunately for her. And so it's going to be she's going to carry it for about 10 months. When this happens, you can kind of imagine his stock takes a nosedive, Philippe's does, and so he's actually going to end up kind of getting exiled. The Tsar and the Tsarina wrote about him many times in their diaries and would often consult him and have conversations with him, and they believed he was a genuine miracle worker. From everything I've read, most people kind of viewed him as a quack, kind of a crazy medical doctor. Whether or not he could summon lightning or have special magnetism powers is kind of up for debate, but he's going to be tried in France twice for illegally practicing medicine and gets acquitted both times, probably due to lack of evidence. And so here's a picture of him with a dog. You can see just wandering the streets here. And then he was known as a healer at 13 and is supposedly going to heal a cut off thumb and put it back together without stitches, which, if that is true, is once again, I will say there are moments when you're looking throughout history where you just kind of scratch your head when you read some of these stories, and you're like, if this is true, this is some of the wildest stuff you'll ever read about. And that's the case, is that he supposedly is going to put this thumb back together without stitches, and the thumb heals just fine, and nothing more, doesn't have to worry about it rotting off or not fitting right. And so keep in mind, Nicholas and Alexander are already they're already consulting people that would be kind of viewed as quacks or just not your normal doctors or medicine men, if you want to put it that way, or whatever you want to call it. And so one of the things that's really fascinating to me is, apparently when he leaves, the story goes, and take this with a grain of salt because it very well could not be true, but he predicts that there's going to be another miracle worker who's going to come after him. Whether or not that happens, they are kind of on the lookout for this. And Nicholas and Alexander are going to call him our friend, which is a term that Rasputin is later going to get as well. And so this is whenever they would, they truly would communicate with him evening after evening for hours and hours, and he has very close access to the ear of the Tsar and the Tsarina in this time period. So this is kind of turn of the century, obviously the 1900s, and so he's going to disappear in 1904 and most likely gets kicked out when this fifth pregnancy is not the son that he swears up and down that the Tsarina is going to have. And maybe they were like, okay, this is one of the worst pregnancies we've ever had, so if you are doing something, it's clearly not working, so you're out. And he is going to die in France in 1905. So to kind of set the stage for Rasputin, let's kind of delve real briefly into the royal family of Russia. If you ever get a chance, their story is incredibly fascinating. And I don't have time to get into all the details today, but his grandfather, Alexander II, is going to be killed by anarchists in Saint Petersburg. So just to show you how backward Russia was for the time period, and maybe one way to word this is backward might not be the right choice. But a couple hundred years behind is probably going to be the better option here. So, for example, it was not uncommon for solar eclipses to scare the tar out of people. It was not uncommon for people to be passed out naked in the gutter in Russia because they had sold their clothes for, one more cup of vodka. It was not uncommon. And then the one thing that is really fascinating is Tsar Alexander II is going to be known as the serf liberator because he liberates the serfs, and basically they're no longer tied to the land or to the lords or the manor. This is in 1862, so keep in mind we're fighting the Civil War in America at the time, and Russia has just outlawed serfdom. Alexander II, and he's a person we could take a whole nother kind of a lecture or an episode on. So I'll just kind of skim over him really briefly. But he's going to be known as kind of really wanting to liberalize Russia, to really make it more open. Because up to this point, the Tsar really is kind of the one calling all the shots. And people really, truly do have almost no rights in Russia at this time. And you could get killed for any little thing or shipped off to Siberia or whatever. And so he really tries to start liberalizing Russia. He is going to allow Finland to become independent. He's also going to be one that really works toward, he really works toward Finnish independence, They're going to break away during the Bolshevik Revolution, but he really encourages the independence of the Finns. And then he's also really is going to be really well known in other countries as well. I think Bulgaria was another one where he is going to be kind of viewed as like helping them to become independent. But in his own country, he's viewed with suspicion. And I think it's this idea that the more you give an inch, they'll take a mile. And there's going to be this group of Russian nihilists who really truly make it their mission to target Alexander. He's going to survive 7 different assassination attempts, and we're talking about they pack a bomb inside of under the kitchen in the palace. You have a guy who disguises himself as a carpenter who's a bomber, is going to do that. They try to bomb the train tracks when they know that the royal train's going to go along it. And the way that they finally get him, and he starts to get this bunker mentality, as you can imagine. There's people trying to throw bombs in his carriage. He actually has a special bomb-proof carriage that's built because he survived so many assassination attempts. He goes to Paris, and there's an assassination attempt on him there. And so, as you can kind of imagine, it's this bunker mentality that really kind of starts to really insulate the royal family from reality. The one thing that's really fascinating is the day that he ends up dying, there's a bill that's he is going to end up signing, I think, or was going to sign by the end of the day, where the Duma, or the parliament, is going to be allowed to exist. So in other words, he's kind of working Russia toward a constitutional monarchy, which would be something like England has today. And there's, he's either signed this bill or is about to sign this bill. And what ends up happening is it was very common. Everybody knew which way his carriage would go. He took, he would was a very similar routine and would do the same thing the same way every day. And so what ends up happening, I think he would go to visit his sister. And as the story goes, there's basically 3 bombers with suitcases. First one throws it underneath the carriage, blows up, but he somehow survives. He gets out, and he wants to see his assassin face to face, and everybody tells him, don't do it, it's not worth it. And I think maybe because the story goes, and take this with a grain of salt, the story goes that he had visited a fortune teller back in the day, and they had told him that he would survive 7 assassination attempts. And so maybe in his mind, he's like, okay, I've kind of vindicated this, I'm done. And after he goes to talk to the person, he turns around, and there's another guy that detonates his suitcase bomb, and basically everything kind of goes up again. And there's this pitiful voice that's kind of heard from the rebels saying, please help me, please help me. And they look, and it's the Tsar, and his legs are basically blown off at the knees. And so what ends up happening is he is going to be begging to be taken home, and he's going to be dragged up the stairs of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. And they talked about, you could see the blood smears going all the way up the stairs to where he's going to be. And then he is going to end up kind of dying from this, as you can imagine. And what ends up happening is the wrong lessons are learned from this, and I think the Russian nihilists go about this the wrong way, because the one person who's really working toward liberalizing Russia at this time is now dead. And so what ends up happening, just to show you, here's a picture of the assassination attempt on his bulletproof or bomb-proof carriage, and then here his son Alexander III and his grandson Nicholas II are both going to see the aftermath of the assassination, and this is obviously really going to weigh on both of them. Nicholas was only 13 years old when this happens, and Alexander, his father, I'm sure he learned all sorts of lessons from this that he's going to put in force when he becomes Tsar. Here's another thing. Tsar Alexander III is going to take over and crack down on all kinds of freedoms. Freedom of the press is severely restricted. There's this idea, and it's just so puzzling. this idea that the Jews were the assassins of Christ, and he actually writes about this on one of them, where he's like, they're the ones who are Christ killers. They assassinated Christ. This is kind of what they deserve. And one of the things that's so historically wrong with this is that the Jews really couldn't have killed Christ if they wanted to. Under the Roman Empire, the Romans are the ones who actually do the crucifying of Christ. Yes, the Jews are the ones who advocate for it, and they say his blood be on us and on our children, which is something that the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, and then people like Tsar Alexander III are also going to use and basically say, well, they asked for it, they're going to get it. And so what ends up happening is pogroms are going to be launched against the Jews. Only one of the people who was involved in this attack, I think there was 7 or 8 of them, is going to be Jewish, but that doesn't matter. It's enough. And so here's another picture. You can see the aftermath of Tsar Alexander II bomb that goes off. And there was a person with a 3rd suitcase in case he doesn't die. And the fascinating part was they actually talked about, they went up and looked at Alexander with their suitcase bomb and realized, yeah, he's kind of done. He's not going to make it. And then they just walked off. Here's, we've already talked about all of this. Here's a picture of Tsar Alexander III. He is going to be kind of a jolly person in private, but he is not that way with Russia. If it's his family, it's great. If he has a happy marriage, he's actually going to marry his older brother's fiance. He was never supposed to be Tsar. His older brother's going to die, and on his deathbed, he begs Alexander to take his fiancée. And of course, back in this day, there was a lot of those, dynastic marriages or arranged marriages to keep empires and countries on peaceful terms. And so he does. He marries her, and their marriage is actually quite peaceful, unlike his dad, who is going to run around with a lot of mistresses. Alexander III has a pretty happy marriage. Unfortunately, once again, not so much for the Jews of Russia at this time. A lot of them are going to flee during these pogroms. If you ever get a chance to go to Saint Petersburg, there is a cathedral called Church of the Savior of the Spilled Blood, and it's actually built on the site of where Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. And there you can see a picture of the cobblestones with a cross where that has been kept, what it would have looked like when Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. There's this Jewish Pale of Settlement, which was founded by Catherine the Great, from what I can tell. And there's, once again, there's sources that say she had nothing to do with it. There's sources that say that she was the one in charge of it. But what was known as the Pale, and it's going to be started by her and Catherine the Great, and is going to end in World War I. Basically, this is kind of an area of confinement where Jews could live outside the Pale, but typically only in Siberia. You had to have special permission to kind of move around out here, and if you were a Jew, you could not live outside the Pale, which kind of leads to that old saying, like, that's beyond the Pale, like, what's acceptable. And so that's something that is going to be a very kind of a common thing. Alexander II relaxed some of the regulations for the Jews, and with his assassination, that ends. And as I kind of mentioned before, Alexander III basically says the Jews are asking for it, they deserve it, and it's going to lead to this hysteria that all of the Jews are trying to overthrow the royal family. Even though only 1 out of the 7 assassins is actually Jewish, doesn't matter, it leads to this hysteria. Unfortunately, people really don't change. You're going to see this time and time again throughout the story, where just because an event happens, everybody kind of loses their minds and latches onto one thing or a scapegoat, and it really just doesn't matter. It's not what actually happens, it's what people believe happened that's the most important thing. And then Nicholas II is actually going to read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a very anti-Semitic screed back in the day, and he believes in what it has to say, and he's kind of similar to his dad in this regard. This is not unusual or uncommon for that time period, doesn't make it right, but that is something that unfortunately is going to be a big part of this time period, was a lot of anti-Semitism. And as I mentioned, a lot of Jews are going to flee Russia to America or to Poland is actually going to be where the Pale is as well. And that's one of the reasons why when Germany takes over Poland and some of those Eastern European countries in World War II, that the Jewish population was so high, is because that was a part of the Russian Empire where the Jews were supposed to settle, the Pale. And then Jews were forbidden to settle in rural areas in 1882. If any of you have seen the movie or the musical Fiddler on the Roof, it's actually set during this time period of Alexander III's reign in Russia. here's what the Pale would have looked like, and you can see it's going to be the modern day cities of like Kiev in Ukraine. You can see it's going to be Minsk in Belarus, and then once again you're going to see that there's even some cities in Crimea all the way over to modern day Poland that are going to be a part of it. And you can see the areas that are in purple are going to be are going to be heavily settled, heavy Jewish presence because that was part of the Pale, and then some areas in Siberia as well. Let's talk about a few other things with Tsar Alexander III. He is going to be a very big into fishing. Matter of fact, he is going to have this saying, when the Tsar of Russia fishes, Europe can wait. That he very much was big into fishing, loved it, has his own fishing lodge that is built, and what ends up happening is his family really doesn't enjoy it as much as he does. They actually really don't visit much at all after his death, and it's been turned into like a park, kind of a historic site, and you can visit it even today. He was 6'4" and was incredibly strong. People talked about he could take like a 5 kopeck or like a nickel coin for us. He could roll it into a tube. He could rip through a deck of playing cards with his bare hands. He could just walk through doors, and that's one that always fascinates me, where he was just so strong he would just walk through the door, and almost like a Wile E. Coyote thing. And then one of his favorite party tricks, and I tried to find pictures of it, but there's no picture of it anywhere. One of his favorite tricks that he loved to do is he would take his wife on one arm, she would be sitting on his one arm, and then his mother or his mother-in-law on his other arm, and at the same time he would raise both of them up to the level of his shoulders, which is just insanely impressive. That's an incredible feat of strength, to have. Even, let's just say they both weighed 120 pounds, which could have been, might not have been, especially with all the clothing that they wore back in the day. But let's just say, being able to lift 240 pounds with your arms all the way up to your shoulders is just impressive, and apparently he would do that trick pretty often. He would also take fireplace pokers, and he would just kind of bend them into pretzels and twist them in knots. Was an incredibly strong person, and he kind of really is almost the image of the Russian bear, that people kind of viewed him as that. So 6'4", incredibly strong. He has a relatively peaceful reign aside from launching pogroms against the Jews. He really doesn't get involved in other wars, and then he loved fishing, as I mentioned before, and then here is his fishing lodge. This is a picture of him on his favorite rock. He had kind of a place where he loved watching watching either people fish or fishing himself, and you can actually see it even today. This was the Tsar Alexander's favorite spot to just sit here and fish and kind of ponder. He knew all the seasons of which fish were running when, and just was really into it. There's a picture of the whole royal family at the lodge, and it's so funny because you can tell he is just beyond happy he's there, and everybody else, it's kind of like they're just there because he's there. He's going to survive a train accident, but the resulting strain on the body is going to cause him to die about 6 years later at the age of 49. We'll come back to this in a second. He really is going to demonstrate almost like superhuman strength in this train accident, but it probably did cause some damage that is going to affect him seriously long term, and actually severely ruins his kidneys. This is the train accident. The train, very condensed story, and this is going to be kind of a big thing in this lecture or series or whatever you want to call it. The train's going way too fast. It's in modern-day Ukraine is where this is happening. The train is going way too fast. They're coming back from Crimea, and they're going up toward Saint Petersburg, and they're doing almost, I think, double the speed for the, that was recommended. And the train jumps the tracks, and it's a 50-foot embankment, and you can see this picture here. I'll come back to that in a second. Because Alexander's going to die so young, he never bothers to train his son, Nicholas II, in the affairs of state. Nicholas is kind of a playboy. He's pretty quiet as a teenager, and he survives an assassination attempt himself in Japan. This crazed Japanese policeman tries to, hit him with a samurai sword, and I think he actually carried that scar for the rest of his life. And then Nicholas is actually going to have a dragon tattoo as well, which was very unheard of for that time and era. So he was kind of something of like a playboy, and then as he gets older, he actually becomes more of a family man, which is an interesting transition. You wouldn't have expected that with him being a teenager. His dad doesn't really bother to train him because, once again, he probably got 20 years or so before he really needs to settle down to the affairs of state. And because he dies at the age of 49, Nicholas really doesn't get any training at all. So to go to this Borky rail disaster one more time, this is a better picture here. The dining car where the royal family was, the whole car collapses and the roof falls in on them. And one of the craziest things about this is Alexander III lifts up the entire roof of the car and holds it over his shoulder so that the royal family can get out. Miraculously, somehow, none of them are injured or killed. And he lifts up the entire train car roof, which is insane. This guy truly did, and I'm sure adrenaline probably factored into it as well, but the guy has superhuman feats of strength, and he ends up kind of ruining one of his kidneys, and that's going to end up kind of killing him 6 years later. Here's kind of a artist rendition of the time, what it looked like. The fact that these cars go over a 50-foot embankment, and they did kill a couple dozen of people, but the fact that the royal family survives is almost something of a miracle. They actually said that when Alexander III shows up to Saint Petersburg, the people are so grateful that he's alive. They actually unhitch the horses from the carriage and they pull the carriage with the Tsar in it themselves, which is it's a very interesting relationship that the Russians had with the Tsars. So here's a picture of the family. We've kind of already showed you a bunch of them here, but you have the Tsar Alexander, and then of course here's Nicholas II in the background. And then Nicholas II, as he gets older, is going to be so similar to his cousins, in particular George V of England, that Queen Victoria, who's his grandmother, ends up confusing them sometimes at family get-togethers and functions. It was not uncommon to confuse Nicholas and King George V of England. Nicholas is in the blue, and then King George is going to be in the white. Let's talk real quickly about Nicholas II. A couple of things with him here. He is going to marry his cousin, Alexandra, and one of the things that ends up happening, as you can imagine, is with all of these marrying your cousins and relatives, you're going to get some inbreeding that goes on, and that's going to cause, obviously, some diseases and some things that you wouldn't see in normal relationships and marriages where you're not marrying people that are your family. And so she is going to be known as the favorite grandchild of Queen Victoria. They're both related through Victoria. She had the nickname Sunny as a child. She's going to be, her mother's going to die when Alexandra is 6, and so what ends up happening is Victoria basically kind of raises her as her own, and Victoria was not above having favorites. People often say with grandparents where it's like, they'll be like, she said that I'm the favorite grandchild, and then you go and talk to them, and it's like they said they told you the same thing as well. Victoria made it very plain that Alexandra was her favorite, and so she is going to kind of raise her as a daughter. So much so that Alexander is actually going to sign letters, like your loving child or loving and faithful child instead of grandchild. She's almost kind of viewed as a daughter of Queen Victoria. Nicholas and Alexandra are going to have an on-again, off-again courtship, and there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, she is Lutheran. She's going to be from Germany, and she does not want to convert to Russian Orthodoxy. She's going to have to change her name if she does that. She's going to have to, follow the Russian Orthodox religion. And he proposes to her, and I guess for 2 hours is trying to convince her, and she says, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to, convert to Russian Orthodoxy. But he is so in love with her, and she is so in love with him that eventually, the second time he proposes, she's just kind of tormented when she says no, that she thinks it's just over and done, and then she is going to end up converting to Russian Orthodoxy, and I think she realizes she doesn't have to renounce her Lutheran faith. It's just a different version of Christianity. She's not going to have to renounce it, and she doesn't. So she stays Lutheran her whole life. One thing that I did think was interesting is they truly did love each other, which was something that was very uncommon for that time period. There was Russian, we talked about Alexander III had a loving marriage, and then Nicholas is going to have a loving marriage. That was not the norm in Russia. It was most czars would have mistresses. The czarina just had to kind of deal with it, put up or shut up. And so that's something that I thought was really fascinating. She's going to meet the family because the family's actually opposed to her as well. That was another thing that was kind of making their relationship on again, off again. They don't like her because she's considered, she comes from Hesse in Germany, which is considered kind of a small German state at the time, and so she's viewed as very much kind of like bargain bin by the Russian royalty. They view her as kind of second hand or a bargain bin kind of thing. And so when Alexander realizes that he's dying and that Nicholas is dead set on marrying her, because he doesn't ever really date anybody else seriously. I think there was a Russian ballerina early on, but that was never was really going to go anywhere. She wasn't royalty. And so what ends up happening is basically Nicholas says, I want her, I don't want anybody else. And so on his deathbed, the dad basically says, okay, you can have her. And so he's going to bring her over. And I can't really imagine, I'm sure for those of you who are married, you know probably how this is, but meeting your date's family, especially if you're serious and maybe you're engaged, in meeting them for the first time and they're mourning not only the father dying, but the Russian leader dying as well. I can't even imagine what that must have been like to just show up, and not only are you the new person on the block, you're in the middle of this horrific family time, and you're just kind of there. And so contrary to popular belief, she actually is pretty gifted language-wise. She knew Italian. She didn't speak French really well, which, ironically enough, and I have no idea why, was the official court language of Russia. So she kind of gets trashed for having bad French, but she actually had pretty decent Russian. She'd had a few Russian lessons when she was a girl, and then when she realizes she's getting engaged, she really kind of starts learning Russian with an earnest desire, and really she could speak pretty passable, fluent Russian, and then she also spoke English as well, which is she was fluent in many different languages. So she's often kind of portrayed as this dour, kind of simple woman, and she was actually very complicated, and just something that often kind of tends to get glossed over a little bit. And then they did genuinely love each other. That is something that was apparent time and time again, is that they truly, genuinely did love each other. But unfortunately, I think they would have made great constitutional monarchs. They would have made probably really great, a really great family if they were anybody else in Russia. But the fact that they're leaders of Russia, and this is what you're signing up for, is going to lead to some problems. Nicholas and Alexandra's wedding and coronation, these are pictures or artist renditions of it. Alexandra basically kind of shows up, and excuse me, I don't know if this is during, if they had already picked the wedding date, but basically he is going to, her father-in-law, Alexander III, he gives his blessing. He ends up dying November 1st. Their wedding is going to be November 26th. And when the Tsar died back in this day, there was a long, long time of kind of funeral mourning that would go on. And Alexandra actually said this herself, that her wedding was basically like a funeral liturgy, except I was wearing white instead of black. It was just like a funeral mass, for lack of a better term. And so she kind of gets married under this cloud of... it's just, it's not the wedding that everybody dreams of. They wanted a private wedding, and they're told, oh no, you're the Tsar and the Tsarina, you are going to have a public wedding, and you're going to be there in front of everybody. Once again, I can see both sides of the coin, and these are people just like you and me. They want to be private, but at the same time, this is what they signed up for, at least in Alexandra's case. And so she is very much wants a private wedding, doesn't get it, has a public wedding, and it just basically goes about as well as a funeral, literally. Then this is a kind of a picture of the coronation here, and I think the woman who is in kind of a brighter, has the sun down on her, is actually going to be the mother-in-law, Nicholas's mother. And she is expecting that Nicholas is going to basically treat her on a level equal to or better than his wife. That doesn't happen, and so there's almost kind of this confrontation, power struggle between Alexandra and her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law kind of expects that she's going to get all the benefits and everything, and be treated well, and then that just doesn't always happen. And the other thing that ends up happening as well is as Nicholas is kneeling to during one part of the coronation, one of I think something that was on his back falls off, and that was considered a bad omen, to the point where they actually have everybody swear a oath of silence that it doesn't come out. And then there was a party or a festival that was offered on the field to kind of commemorate, and they basically have refreshments, they have some food, and I want to say there was like some beer, vodka, some drinks as well. And what ends up happening is a rumor goes through the crowd that they're running out, and so there's this massive stampede. People are running all over each other and crushing each other, and they said that by the time it all settles, it ends up looking like a battlefield. It's not a real good start to their reign. Nicholas and Alexandra go to the hospital, and they're going to end up seeing some of the victims. They spend the day in prayer with the victims, and then they do something that really does not go over well. There's a ball that is being held, and they actually don't want to be there, and they're told that they have to be there anyway. And it's a really kind of a bad look where it's like they're dancing while people are mourning, and so it just does not bode very well. Nicholas and Alexandra are going to have 5 children. There are going to be 4 girls and a boy. And just to run through them really quickly, this is a whole nother subject for another time. I'd love to. The Russian royal family fascinates me so much. I'd love to be able to talk about the daughters as well. They're often so overlooked compared to the son, Alexei, because of his hemophilia, and we'll come back to that in a second. But they are incredibly fascinating in their own right, and maybe at some point, Kaylee and Jillian, you know who you are, we can do an episode with the daughters, and I'd absolutely love to get your opinion on it and be able to pick your brains on it, especially with Anastasia, the musical. So the oldest one is going to be Olga, and then you're going to have Tatiana is going to be the second one, Maria is going to be the third daughter, and then Anastasia is going to be the fourth one. And one thing that is fascinating is Maria is actually going to be named after one of Alexandra's siblings, who is going to end up dying relatively early. And then you have Alexis, or Alexei, as he's known. A couple of things real quick here with them. This is a picture that everybody, probably one of the more famous pictures of the royal family here when they're a little bit older. They all get along really well, and they all tend to be very close-knit family. Unfortunately, it's a little too close-knit as in regards to they're basically in a gilded cage. That they actually talked about that the sisters were shocked one time when they went out in public and saw people using money to buy stuff. Like, they just never understood that concept. And we've had leaders who have done that before. You had George H.W. Bush, who was kind of like, he was surprised at how a checkout machine worked, and it's not uncommon. They actually had a story with Stalin where he goes to buy something. They're out and about, and they buy something from some lady with a push cart, and Stalin has no money to pay for it, and so it's this almost kind of comedy of errors where everybody's fumbling around asking, "Do you have any money? Do you have any money? Do you have any money?" Because they didn't need money. Everything they wanted, they just got. Didn't have to worry about the things of life like we do. And so they actually talk about that they were very isolated, unfortunately, from reality in a lot of ways. And I think that the daughters, if they could have, would have loved to have gone out and explore and do things and go places. But it was in that era of assassinations and threats, and the whenever they would go on vacation to England, everybody was always kind of surprised at how much the Russian royal family had to do to not be assassinated, as far as their security was always abnormally tight. Nicholas is a better father than a ruler. He truly does love his family. The press is ruthless, as daughter after daughter is born with no son. One thing that puzzled me greatly, and had to do some research into this, was Russia had female tsarinas before. This is not unusual at all. Matter of fact, Olga, if things had been the way they were, she could have been in line, first in line to the throne, and probably would have done fairly well at it. The problem, though, is after Catherine the Great, Paul really does not like the way that she treated his dad, Peter III. And so what ends up happening is Paul is going to is going to change things to where that it's only males can take over and not females. So kind of like the throne of France back in the day, where if the Tsar or the king has all daughters, then it's going to go to the uncle, or it's going to go to the next male heir, and it's going to skip the family altogether. Nicholas could have changed it. Matter of fact, he actually gets deathly ill with typhoid fever before the son is born, and so they actually had kind of seriously kicked around the idea of changing the line of succession to make the daughter next in line to the throne, Olga, and they never did. He recovers, and then the son is born, and so that kind of makes the point moot. But I do think that if he had changed that around, things probably would have been a lot different. But the press is going to be ruthless. Alexander's going to have a miscarriage at one point, and they're going to claim that she's running around with somebody, and that's why there's a miscarriage. It's God's judgment. So imagine, and this is the part that's so frustrating. Imagine that you come over from another country to another country, and everybody's just kind of dogging you relentlessly. And your one job as a Tsarina is to provide an heir to the throne, and it feels like you're not being able to do that. 4 daughters in a row, no son. The pressure builds on the family, especially Alexandra. She views herself as being responsible for this, which is kind of sad because the male is the one who determines the gender of the child, not the female. But so often throughout history, aka Henry VIII, the female is the one who often gets the blame for it. And Alexandra, she's already kind of high-strung on a good day as it is, and we'll talk through a few more things with her in just a minute. But she's super high-strung. She kind of views herself as being the problem. She's the one to blame. And apparently after when the second daughter's born, she sees the look of everybody around her and just kind of like freaks out and kind of starts screaming that she has not, that it's another daughter instead of a son. Which, I mean, imagine how that daughter had to feel. One thing that is interesting to me is if you ever want to know the order of the children, they would call themselves Atma. They had the acronym that they would use. So it was Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and then Anastasia, or Anastasia, I say it both ways, was the youngest. And so imagine how Tatiana had to feel. When the 4th daughter's born, Nicholas goes for a long walk. He doesn't say anything, but he goes for a long walk and apparently smokes for a while. And when he's asked about it later on, and I believe him, when he was asked about this later on, he says if he had to do it over again, have 4 daughters, he would. He's a great father. He's a great husband. And by all accounts, the daughters get along with him quite well. But as you can imagine, everybody's kind of mad at him, or not mad at him, but mad at the royal family because there is no son. There's no heir to the throne. And it's just so, once again, this probably adds to the bunker mentality where you're having the media just constantly and I think it was a way to get at the royal family without getting at them necessarily, where you could kind of vent your spleen or get mad at the royal family without going to the gulag or, being accused of treason for threatening the life of the Tsar. So you could just kind of go after the family. And then we've already kind of talked about this. Alexandra has a molar pregnancy between Anastasia and Alexei. The baby's stillborn after a month, but she carries it for a full 9 months and thinks she's pregnant. And so she has 2 miscarriages from what I can tell. So she had 7 pregnancies in total, and 2 of them are miscarriages. There was one in between, I want to say between Olga and Tatiana, and then she has the one after Anastasia and before Alexei. When that miscarriage happens, the press writes that she had a baby with horns. They had to kill it because of it. It was some sort of a monster. That's the reason why she had the miscarriage. And so once again, lesser people probably would have snapped on this. And the fact that the royal family is still, normal after this is pretty surprising. Nicholas is actually loves photography, and he took a lot of pictures, and he would have made a great photographer. Just some of he really enjoyed taking candids. And so this is Olga and Tatiana with their governess when they were younger. I think this was in Crimea. Here's a picture of Nicholas waiting in Finland. And then this is a picture of Olga and Tatiana as they're older with one of their teachers. And here's a picture of, I want to say this is Maria. I'm not 100% sure which one that is. It might have been Olga. I think it might have actually been Olga. I do apologize. I think this might be Olga too. They said that she was often very contemplative, very kind of moody. And as you think about it, each of these women had their own personalities, and they would obviously they're all raised the same, but they're all going to be a little bit different as well. I do apologize about this. I want to say it's Olga because she looks very similar to the previous picture. And then here's a picture of the Tsar basically kayaking or canoeing with all three, with three of his daughters in this picture. And then here's a few more. This is him with, I think, one of the guards. And then you can see Anastasia after tennis. And then this is Alexandra having her bust made out of clay. And so she's actually there taking a look at it. And then here's a picture of Alexandra with Nicholas on vacation. And once again, I feel bad because I know she's been through a lot, and we'll talk through more of what Alexandra's gone through in just a second, and you'll kind of see a little bit of this. I feel really bad for her. She had a very rough hand that she was dealt in life, but I think sometimes she was known as kind of a hypochondriac. She was always kind of sick, or that she was faking a sickness or whatever it was. And so she was actually kind of wheelchair bound for a lot of, especially later on in her life. Here's a picture of Alexandra with her grandmother Victoria, and then this is going to be Edward VII, or Bertie, standing above her on the right, and then you can see Nicholas in the black. And then my favorite is this is Olga as a baby. Like, she was a very, very chunky baby. They actually talked about when she was born, she was quite large, very big baby. I just love that picture. It's great. So this is the thing that, unfortunately, Alexandra is also going to bring into the family, is hemophilia. The sad part is this is brought about by Victoria, and hemophilia even now is it's a very interesting, very complicated disease, and it doesn't always make sense sometimes how it's transferred. So Alexandra is going to get it from her mother, Alice. And the one thing that is really interesting is that basically the way that hemophilia works is if you're a male, you only need one strike to have hemophilia. If you're a female, you have to have a strike on both of the chromosomes, I think both the X chromosomes, and you'll end up having hemophilia. But it's a lot, it does not happen nearly as often in females as it does in males. The one thing that is also quite interesting is just because you are a hemophiliac or a heavy bleeder does not mean that you cannot have children of your own. If Alexei had survived to adulthood and he had children of his own, his boys would actually not have had hemophilia. His daughters could have been carriers, but the sons would not have hemophilia. The one thing that's interesting is hemophilia actually kind of worked itself out of the royal family after 1945. It was either the sons died before they had kids, or it's a kind of a recessive gene. And the problem is, because you're marrying cousins, it's going to end up causing the recessive trait to become dominant. And so Alexandra is going to be a carrier. And one thing that's not shown on this that I thought was really interesting is after they dug up the bodies of the daughters, only one of the daughters is actually going to be considered a carrier, and we'll come back to that in just a second. So this is the royal secret, and this is something that was well known, and sorry there's so much here, but contrary to popular belief, Nicholas and Alexandra were worried the whole pregnancy that any possible son could be a hemophiliac. Alexandra's sister Irene had two hemophiliac sons. It actually caused a severe rift in their marriage, Irene's husband and her, because he blamed her. In some ways he's right, and in some ways he's wrong, but blamed her for the hemophiliac sons that they had. Two of them were hemophiliacs. Her older brother Friedrich died at the age of 1 from a bleeding episode due to a nasty fall. And then Leopold, her uncle, which is going to be, and I'll come back to this, Victoria's son, is also going to die. I think he was in his 30s, fell down the stairs, and had massive internal bleeding, and ends up dying that way. And so you can see, okay, so it says Friedrich died at the age of 3. The one source I saw said it was 1. The other one, this one here, says 3. So probably 3 seems a little bit more on the nose. So I do apologize about that. And then you can see Valdemar of Prussia, he lived to be 56. Henry dies at the age of 4. These are Irene's children, and then there's a normal male that was also there as well. And you can kind of see, looking at this, it is fascinating taking a look how some siblings are targeted, other siblings are not. Genetics is really, really interesting. Then the other thing that Alexandra is going to deal with is her mother, as well as her closest sister Marie, is going to die from a diphtheria outbreak when Alex is 6. She was known as ALIX for most of her life until she gets married. And she's going to become more withdrawn and shy as a result. And then her dad is going to die when she's 19. So to top all of this off, I mean, she goes kind of from bad to worse to worse. So she has a brother who's a hemophiliac. Her sister, it's well known that she's had a couple of kids that are hemophiliacs as well. And now, she's basically, at the age of 19, she's an orphan. And then I've already kind of mentioned this. Victoria raised her as her own child. Alexandra would sign letters to her, "Your loving and grateful child." And then she weeps openly at Victoria's funeral, which actually surprised a lot of people because they were so used to seeing her. People would joke that it was like Alexandra swallowed a yardstick, that she was always super stiff, super formal, very never showed emotion. And so her weeping openly at Victoria's funeral in public was very unusual. And so I do feel really badly for Alexandra because she does have a hand that is just a very tough hand to play, and I feel really badly for her. And here's another picture of her as a little girl. She gets the nickname Sunny for a while, and then I think that life just kind of keeps beating her up one side and down the other, and she ends up kind of getting more withdrawn. She was terribly shy to the point where if she felt like people were looking at her, she'd get really blotchy, like kind of these red spots on her face. Even when she was an adult, if she was in a receiving line, people often talked about she would get really blotchy in the face. And then she actually would, when she was doing like a piano performance, she just stopped in the middle of it and couldn't go on because people were looking at her. Just was very, very shy, almost reclusive. She became very serious when she got older, and take this with a grain of salt. This is kind of allegedly here, but her cousin told her when she was little, "You always play at being sorrowful. One day the Almighty will send you some real crushing sorrows, and then what are you going to do?" Which is crazy, if that is, because once again, it's easy to kind of look back at history and kind of fill in some of the blanks here, but if that's what her cousin did tell her, that is very on the nose. So, once again, when Alexei's born, they're super grateful that it's a boy. But they do know in the back of their minds that there is the very real possibility that their son could be a hemophiliac. When they cut the umbilical cord, apparently this bleeds for days, and part of it was the pressure that was done by the swaddling at the time, and this goes on for a while where they just cannot get the bleeding to stop. The Tsar estimates that his son lost about 1/8 to 1/9 of his blood by the time they finally did get it to stop. Now, what their occasion of joy is now, imagine I guess the best way to put it is imagine, the famous sword that is suspended over your table by a hair. The sword of Damocles. It's the same thing in this situation, where your whole life now you are going to have to do everything you possibly can to bring this son up to adulthood. And back in this era, hemophilia was a death sentence. Not many people lived to adulthood with it. Nowadays, the sad part with modern medicine is it's very treatable. This would have been something that no big deal. I actually had a friend I went to school with. He was a hemophiliac, and he talked to me about the medicine or the things that he had to take for it. And he had to be more careful, obviously, but it was not life altering to the extent that it would have been back in this time period, where it truly was the kiss of death. And even the diphtheria that her mother and her sister are going to get lost to is not something that was, something that now could be fairly easily treatable. And to top it off, he's a boy. He's going to be rambunctious. He's going to want to do stuff. He's going to want to play. He's going to want to, do all these things. And they're going to try basically to almost like have him wrapped in bubble wrap. This is something just to kind of keep in mind. Alexei comes close to close to death at least 3 times in his life due to getting bumped, getting out of a boat, a rough carriage ride, and sledding down the stairs. These are the 3 things that literally are putting him at death's door. So imagine being a boy and being told you can't bike, you can't jump, you can't play, you can't do this, you can't do that. And not unsurprisingly, he had to be held and carried a lot. And as he gets older, I'm sure that doesn't go super hot. And here's another picture of him as a little bit older. I thought that was really kind of cool. He's got like all the curly hair and everything. And he really could not do any normal young boy activities. He had to kind of sit around a lot, and it just is so sad because, not only are you in a gilded cage, you're in a gilded cage that has bubble wrap around it. So for Alexei, I'm sure life was almost unbearable in some points. And unsurprisingly, he acts out as a result. He loved picking on people. He would pick on his sisters and pinch them and slap them. And what can you do? You can't spank him. If you do, you might cause blood vessels to rupture. And so you can't spank him, you can't punish him, you can't slap his wrist, can't slap his hand. And so he calms down when he becomes a teenager. But especially when he's a young boy, he's always being told no. And his sisters can do stuff that he can't. And I'm sure that was incredibly frustrating for him. The mother, Alexandra, is going to pray for hours each day for healing. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen. And I can only imagine that she, her talks with God and with the Lord, I'm sure there had to be some incredible frustration and some incredible, begging the Lord for this to go away, and it just doesn't. I'm sure that this truly was a rough time for her, and she's grasping at straws and reaching out for anything. One other thing that's really, really interesting, and I had forgotten to mention this, and sorry, this is like a stream of consciousness here, but when Alexandra comes over to Russia, she originally is going, because her name was Alex, she's originally going to take the name Yekaterin, is the name that she planned on taking, and she was told, I think the Tsar didn't really care for it, and then a couple other people, they were like, why don't you just take the name Alexandra? Your name's Alex anyway. And so she becomes Alexandra, and Yekaterinburg is going to be the place where they end up dying, and it's just so kind of on the nose, where she wants to take, she's going to take the Russian name Yekaterin, and then they end up dying in Yekaterinburg. It's just a really, really fascinating, there's so many ironies in this story. The family does something that just does not seem smart then or now. They keep it secret. They decide they're not going to do anything to tell anybody about it. And so it leads to all sorts of rumors that Alexei's missing the outer layer of skin on him. Alexei's got this, he's got that, he's cursed, he's, whatever it is. And so I don't understand why they didn't just come out and say it. They had some interesting ideas. Alexandra said that she didn't really need to earn the people's respect, that Russia, they just automatically love and support the Tsar. And so I think she's a little naive in some areas here. And I think in this area, the fact that they kept it a secret, like Nicholas didn't even tell his own mother about Alexei's hemophilia. And anybody who worked in the palace was sworn to secrecy. So this is super, super closely guarded. Keep that in mind. It's going to play a lot into what we talk about in a few minutes. This was one of the first times that the people in public would have actually seen Alexei. This was after one of his episodes, and he's being openly carried here, and that was one of the first times people saw after the 8 years that the heir to the throne was not doing well. One thing that is puzzling, and I'm not 100% sure on this, she was 32 when she had Alexei. I don't know if they tried to have any more children, or if maybe after having 7 pregnancies, her body was just done. I'm not 100% sure on that, and if anybody knows, you can always leave it in the comments. I'd be fascinated to know what that's all about. But Alexei's the last one, and unfortunately, he's the one who has hemophilia, this uncontrollable bleeding. It's going to lead to rumors being spread about Alexei, and then one thing that was really fascinating is all of the siblings were reported to be heavy bleeders. Maria had surgery to remove her tonsils, and she was bleeding so heavily that the doctor actually stops in the middle of it, and he's like, I can't go any further. And the mom's like, oh, no, you don't. Like, you don't just stop a surgery halfway. She needs her tonsils out. You're going to take them out. And so all of the siblings were reported to be heavy bleeders, but not obviously to the level of Alexei, where he would bleed for days at a time, and just getting bumped was enough to cause him internal bleeding. So that's going to be something that was really fascinating, that all of them were known to be that way. And then it's going to obviously affect the whole family. It affects the mom, it affects the dad, it affects Russia, and also it ruins the sisters' marriage prospects. As they get older, not many people are interested because they're afraid they're getting damaged goods. That if they marry Olga, if they marry Tatiana, Maria, of course Anastasia was still relatively young at the time, and so would have Maria as well. But especially as Olga kind of reaches that age of becoming a debutante, or making her debut into society, it's really going to kind of dim her prospects. because they're terrified that they're going to be carriers. Interestingly enough, Anastasia was the only one from all the research they did on the bodies after their deaths, when they found them, that Anastasia was the only one who was actually a carrier. All of the other girls actually were not. And so if they had gotten married, they would have had normal, their kids would not have had hemophilia. Just Anastasia and Alexei would have been the ones who would have kept it going. So let's kind of talk really quickly here about Alexei's bleeding episodes. And so we're not going to go into all of them, but this is going to kind of set the stage for Rasputin. And obviously you cannot have Rasputin without Alexei and his bleeding. They talked about, and with hemophilia back in this day, one of the reasons it was so unbearable was that blood would pool into the joints and bones, and it would cause horrendous pain. It actually would start to eat away at your joints as well. Not to the point where it's like acid, but it would slowly, just would cause pain. And you often could not bend or unbend your limbs. And they mentioned as well that Alexei was never given pain meds, which is phenomenal to think about, because they said the pain would come in like 15-minute bursts, and I'm not sure if they didn't have pain meds for him or any that were strong enough. I don't know. I don't remember for sure. Alexandra was known as, she was, once again, kind of high-strung. She doesn't really fit in well with Saint Petersburg society. She's kind of viewed as like Queen Victoria, kind of almost like a prude, where Saint Petersburg is openly, they're big into parties, they're big into celebrations, they're big into, you name it, whatever it is, they're doing it. And Alexandra's not that way. And so I'm not sure if she just intentionally doesn't give him pain meds, but they talked about, especially as he gets older, he would scream for hours until he was hoarse. And servants would have to wear cotton in their ears to deaden the sound. And the only relief he ever would get was when he passed out due to the pain, which I cannot even imagine, being 8 years old, 3 years old, however old you are when you have these episodes. I cannot even imagine that your only relief is just passing out. Like, it just had to be absolutely horrible. At one point, Alexei was given last rites, and the official telegram of death was drawn up. Like, it was pretty severe. Like, there was no way he was going to recover from this, and we'll come back to that in a second. And during the worst episode, and this one went on for 11 days, which is crazy, he asked his mother, "When I die, it won't hurt anymore, will it?" And he asked her to bury him in the woods. He didn't want to be married in the mausoleum where all of his ancestors were. He much rather would have been buried in the woods, looking up at the sky under a marker of stones. And not unsurprisingly, Alexander's hair actually started graying after this episode. I don't know how it couldn't have. Nicholas, they said he could only go into the room for a couple of minutes at a time, and he just could not bear to watch his son suffering. And he said, I think, if I remember right, and this is every parent's worst nightmare, watching your son suffer or your daughter suffer and not being able to do anything about it, and not being able to take that pain for them. I'm sure the sisters, it had to be absolutely horrible as well. And then to top it off, you have the sword of Damocles, which is if he dies, what happens? It's going to be the uncle who's next in line to the throne. It just causes so much tension, not only in the family, and you can't even have peace as a family and grieve privately or just kind of mourn for Alexei privately in the pain and suffering, because everyone in Russia wants to know what's happening. And of course, the issue is not only a family member, but now it's a state matter as well. Just to show you, here's a picture of Alexandra with Alexei during one of his episodes. I think there's a nurse kind of off in the corner of the right-hand side, and Alexandra, it looks like she's knitting or crocheting, doing something, and then Alexei's in bed. And they often, one of the episodes, he's bleeding into his groin, so you can't really prop anything up, like his leg, or if he had bleeding there. And then this is it's so sad to me. They tried so many things for him. They tried mud baths. They would try all these different things. And you can see kind of in the background, and hopefully this picks up here, this soldier was one who was responsible for kind of keeping an eye on Alexei. And then here's another picture of that same soldier with Alexei on a bike. Because once again, Alexei can't ride a bicycle. What happens if he falls? What happens if he tips over? And so I feel really bad for the whole family. And then, of course, enter Rasputin. This is a picture that just cracks me up. He is on a carriage that is being pulled by a white horse, which apparently was one of his favorites. He really enjoyed this white horse. And once again, he had a way with horses, and you're going to see in a second, had a way with humans as well. So how did Rasputin become a part of the royal family? Alexei had internal bleeding and swelling in his leg when he was 3 years old. And this is going to be something that is just always in the back of Nicholas and Alexander's mind, that our son is going to have some bleeding episode, and at some point, there's nothing we can do. All other options had been exhausted, and Rasputin had been introduced to one of the extended family, and they had introduced him to Nicholas and Alexandra. He is going to come in, he prays over the boy, and he basically says, your pain is going away, you will soon be well, you must thank God for healing you, and now go to sleep. And the next day, Alexei was better, and the swelling in his leg had disappeared. They said it was to the point where, like, Alexei's kind of, before, had been running a super high fever. He's kind of semi-conscious, almost delirious. And the next day, he is better, and the swelling in the leg had completely disappeared. And Rasputin is going to do this to Alexei multiple times throughout his life. And then one thing that I thought was interesting, and keep in mind this quote, I thought this was fascinating, and it may very well just be part of Rasputin's legend. Let me go back. Okay, there's a quote that he says that I'll come back to in a minute. Alexei's worst bleeding episode is going to occur in Spale, and I think I butchered the name of that. I do apologize. Spale, Poland, when Alexei was 8. It would have been a part of Russia at the time. And what's going to end up happening here is this is the incident where he gets bumped on a carriage ride with his mother. He had a hematoma in his leg before, and I guess the ride was super rough, and it's going to actually cause the hematoma, which is where blood kind of pools up inside of your body. It's going to cause this hematoma to rupture. This event happens for 11 days, and unlike the time where he is 3, he now can talk. And so that's where he starts saying, like, if I'm gone, this is not going to hurt anymore, is it? And he would scream out time and time again, "Oh Lord, have mercy on my soul. Oh Lord, have mercy on my soul." And I cannot imagine how heartrending that had to be as family to hear this. And it got to the point where his fever is just spiking. It's out of control. He asked his mother, "Can you relieve my pain? Can you take my pain away from me? Please take this away." And this going on for almost 2 weeks. I mean, over a week and a half. I can't even begin to imagine just the mental anguish that's going on. This is where the story really gets interesting as far from a Rasputin point of view. The newspapers are going to announce the Tsarevich was at death's door. Rasputin already knew about it. Supposedly he's walking with his daughter, and the day before Alexei has his accident, he falls to his knees and basically is groaning about the Tsarevich, which is the crown prince. And his daughter asks him about it, and she says, "What's going on, Dad?" And he basically says, "Something is about to happen to Alexei." Which, if true, he's in Siberia. He's thousands of miles away. Crazy. He began hemorrhaging into his stomach. The fever began to rise so fast. This is where they draw up the official death announcement, and it's pretty much everything was looking super bleak. Finally, in desperation, the Tsarina is going to send a telegram to Rasputin in Siberia begging for help. He had been kicked out or sent into exile. Part of it was Rasputin's fault. He's hanging out in the private quarters with the Tsar and Tsarina's family, with the daughters in their nightgowns, with Alexei in his nightgown. Nothing seemed to happen, and I want to stress this because Rasputin, I think you'll see in a minute. We're going to talk through more of this in a second. Rasputin's dumb, but I don't think he's suicidal. In regards to if you want to be shipped off to Siberia or have your head chopped off for treason, the best way to be doing that is to be running around with one of the Tsar's daughters. And I just don't see that happening. And one of the things that people talked about was with Rasputin was he acted completely differently around the royal family than he did around anybody else. And part of it, I do think he knew which side his bread was buttered on, as far as if he wanted to keep coming back to the royal palace, he could not act like an idiot. I also think part of it was, he knew the power that he had. So Rasputin sends back a telegram saying, "The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." And the crazy part, and this is the one that people really don't know about, and even the research I did, I don't know. Alexei began to recover around the time the telegram was received, within a couple of hours, and he was fully recovered within a week. All the doctors said there was no way that he was going to survive, that he was going to recover, and he does. And this is going to be where Alexandra is now convinced that Rasputin is a miracle worker. Nicholas doesn't see it. He is suspicious of Rasputin, and rightfully so. But he also sees that Rasputin is probably the what's going to end up the reason that Alexei stays alive. And somebody asked him about Rasputin at one point, and he gave this quote, which I thought was interesting. And I looked it up. There's some places that say he said it, some places that say he don't. So once again, he doesn't. So take this with a grain of salt, much like everything else about Rasputin's life. But he supposedly said, "I would much rather have 10 Rasputins than one of Alexandra's hysterical outbursts." So if that's the case, I think he saw that this is going to be what happened. Rasputin supposedly had told Alexandra, "Neither you or the Emperor can do without me. If I'm not there to protect you, you'll lose your son within 6 months." Can you imagine? Number one, the sheer gall of Rasputin to say that. Number two, what a weasel. Like, he knows that they're so terrified of losing their son that they'll, allow him to be there. And so, one thing I had forgotten to mention is there's with Rasputin hanging out with everybody in their nightgowns in their private quarters, it leads to all these rumors that he's running around with all the girls and that he's, doing all these horrible, bizarre, weird things to them. He actually is asked to leave because of that, and I don't think the family doesn't see anything. And once again, I don't think there was anything that went on. He acts completely differently around the family, but he's actually back in Siberia, and he could kind of come and go as he pleased. Like, he was not like their minion at the palace. He could go back to Siberia, and he did a couple of different times. That's actually when he ended up going to Israel. Was when he got kicked out of the royal family's favor for a little bit. So the big question is, how did he do it? How did he heal Alexei's bleeding? And then here's a picture of him at tea time with the Tsarina and some of the royal kids. And this is the last picture that we have of Rasputin before his death, which I thought was really... And the guy next to him honestly could be a Rasputin-type figure as well, but this is a picture of Rasputin, the last one that we have of him before his death. There are a lot of theories, and we'll kind of run through some of these really quickly. Hypnosis. Some people think that he could hypnotize, and that maybe that was one of the ways that he could stop the bleeding, was just kind of through sheer force of will. There was probably, this also had a factor, was he was a calming influence on Alexander and Alexei. Apparently Alexander would go into hysterics, and probably if you're a little kid and your mom is losing her mind, I cannot imagine that you're going to be normal and chill either. And so probably seeing your mom calm down and would also help you to calm down and stop the bleeding to an extent, because the more excited you get, the higher your blood pressure is going to go, and the more you're going to end up losing blood if you're a hemophiliac. The other thing, and this is probably a big factor as well, by having the doctors stay away from Alexei, they're not giving him aspirin, which is a blood thinner, and so he may have recovered that way. They were unknowingly giving him aspirin because it was kind of considered like a miracle drug back in the day, and for a hemophiliac, the worst thing you can have is a blood thinner, and so maybe that also helped. Alexander believed this, that he had a connection with God, or the devil, could have been demonic. Alexander believes that he has a connection with God and that he's a miracle worker, and she obviously doesn't believe the devil part, but the fact that he can somehow heal their child, she believes is something from the Lord. The doctors could not figure it out, and this one is one that still to this day has been debated heavily by medical experts. The incident where Alexei's bleeding to death in Poland and Rasputin is thousands of miles away in Siberia. Makes no sense. So, regardless of what Rasputin does, whether it was something mystical or whether it was just something as simple as not having aspirin, nobody knows to this day. Was it occultic? Was it mystical powers? We genuinely don't know. I do apologize if this whole slide showed up at once. We'll kind of hack through it real quick here. Rasputin now has unlimited access to the royal family. We mentioned that Nicholas is skeptical, but his wife believes in him wholeheartedly. And Rasputin is one way around the royal family. He would often refer to the Tsar and the Tsarina as Mama and Papa, which I thought was really interesting. And he was another way in St. Petersburg. People reported that no matter how drunk Rasputin was, he could be in the middle of an absolute bender. But if he was summoned to the royal palace, he would always show up sober by the time he got there, which is crazy. I don't know how he did that. Once again, I do wonder if he had some sort of connections to the spiritual world in some ways. There's just, whether it was occultic or whether it was of God. I don't, and we're going to talk about this more in a second. I don't think Rasputin was a Christian in any sense of the word. The fact that he calls himself Christ in miniature is enough for me to think that he really... But I do think he was genuinely seeking God, and I do wonder if he tapped into some sort of spiritual power that wasn't at all. Because it talks about in the Bible that, Satan himself can masquerade as an angel of light. And so I do wonder if he had tapped into something that he thought was Christian, but was not. I don't know. The family views him as a man of God, and there are just some things. They said that Rasputin's ribs, I think, were fused together, or there was some sort of. He was known for being incredibly powerful, and some people think that it may have been that his ribs were actually his rib cage was fused, which is fascinating. Rasputin is going to become very popular with the ladies of St. Petersburg, and that is something that we're not going to get into all the details of it because, quite frankly, it's kind of disgusting, some of the stuff that he does, but it is going to be very well known that he is incredibly popular with the women of St. Petersburg. He's exotic. He's unusual. He doesn't dress like them. He doesn't act like them. He has a thick accent. He didn't learn to read or write for most of his life. And so he actually teaches himself. His writing is horrible. If you look at it today, his writing was atrocious, but he does teach himself to write. And so he becomes incredibly popular with the folks, especially the gals of St. Petersburg. And as you can imagine, all the guys are keeping an eye on their wives when Rasputin walks into the room. This is probably due to him being exotic, and then the fact that the Russian nobility was obsessed with spirit communication, the occult during this time, and Rasputin claims to be able to do this. Then, this is some of the stuff that's just weird to me. Women would fight over souvenirs from him. We're talking in the hundreds. That they would, including fingernail clippings, pieces of his food. They would line up in lines of a couple hundred to wash his feet. His apartment, they actually had a group of them that were known as Rasputin's girls. Every morning, there would just be women out there waiting for him to wake up, and they would wave and smile and hopefully get summoned inside. The secret police and his enemies often referred to his apartment as the Holy of Holies, and that is just blasphemous, number one, because there was nothing holy that was going on in there. It's just, the hard part, once again, is the myth is going to start to become the legend. The secret police are going to investigate him twice. Supposedly he was in the Klist, which was kind of like a cult where the more you sinned, the closer you drew to God. They would often have all sorts of sexual practices that would happen in their church services. The secret police investigate him twice, and they cannot prove that he's a member of the Klist. They actually have to basically drop the case for lack of evidence. It's KHLYST. And basically, they have to drop these for lack of evidence. But he does act in some ways like this, that the more you sin, the closer you'll get to God. The other one, we mentioned women line up to wash his feet and lick the crumbs from his fingers, just really kind of weird. There was one woman who showed up on his door one day. Rasputin opens it, and she basically points the gun at him and says, "I'm here to assassinate you, but I cannot go through with it because I'm just so in love with you." And she falls into his arms. This would go to anybody's head. I don't care who you are. For somebody like Rasputin, who's like comes from the middle of Siberia, and apparently in his church services, he's kind of being viewed over there as like this exotic man of God. I'm sure it starts to go to his head after a while. His wife knows about all these relationships, and she says Rasputin has enough love in his heart for everyone, which is crazy to me. So she's okay with it, which is wild, number one. And then number two, this is Rasputin being surrounded by hordes of women. And then I don't know if this woman has a mustache or not, but if she does, that is pretty impressive. And then a couple other things real quick here. I had to show a few random memes just because we've kind of been going through this for a second. Rasputin and Rasputin, and then you have Rasputin in history. Two completely different people. And then you versus the guy she told you not to worry about. I thought that was pretty pretty epic as well. Yeah, and then you think your girl is loyal, put her in a room with Rasputin. I imagine a lot of boyfriends and husbands in this era were very concerned when their wife came in contact with Rasputin. Apparently his personality was magnetic. Who would win? A dangerous blood clotting disorder or a crazy man with a big beard? That was pretty good. And then you have Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. And then this made me laugh way too hard. Palpatine, lover of democracy. It was too good to not pass up here. Needless to say, Rasputin is going to make a lot of enemies, particularly most of the men of Saint Petersburg. Once again, if Rasputin does 1/10 of what people say he did, it's nuts. If 1/10 of his life is accurate to what all these stories are, it's insane. He would brag about how close he was to the Tsar and the Tsarina. He did that. Take this with a grain of salt. He claims that he's running around with the Tsarina and that he's sleeping with her. Most likely he is drunk as a skunk when he's making this comment. Because once again, why would you do this to yourself if you're sober? The best thing that can possibly happen is you don't get kicked out of the palace and thrown in Siberia. A couple of things that are really interesting here, and this is just what makes me think that it never really did happen, is that the Tsarina was known once again as kind of being a prude. When they had their parties or their balls in St. Petersburg, she starts leaving people off the guest list that were considered scandalous, and it gets to the point where there's nobody left. Because anybody that she considered scandalous, she just doesn't invite anymore, and just really starts to kind of erode her popularity. The other thing was she would keep the toilet covered up with like a blanket or like a cover when it wasn't in use in the palace. Was just kind of considered very prudish, and so to me, that just makes me think that and from everything that has been written, like letters back and forth to her husband, she's incredibly loyal, supports him in all areas. Matter of fact, probably a little too much, because she supports him in basically being this autocrat or absolute czar, with unlimited power, when his best thing he could have done was become a constitutional monarch. So, and then there's also the case that could be made that maybe she's naive and she doesn't know what's going on in her own family, which seems, once again, it could have been the case, but it just seems a little improbable. The main reason being that at some point one of the daughters probably would have said something if something was going on, or I feel like Alexandra would have. There's no way, just from her background and her upbringing, that she and Rasputin are running around. Doesn't matter. That is what people believe, and so that's gonna cause all sorts of problems, because people believe that he is just running around. He's lover of the Russian queen, as the song goes, and so that he's just running around with the Tsarina and just plotting to overthrow the Russian Empire. And then this is another one that's really up for debate. He would supposedly engage in public exposure and just flash people, which is just he does. I think a lot of the pressure of all the attacks on him starts to wear, and so he starts becoming a really heavy drinker, to the point where it's kind of embarrassing. Like, he'd pass out in public sometimes, or but the other thing that was really interesting is that he's a huge supporter of the temperance movement. So you can kind of see the dichotomy of Rasputin. He's a big fan of, we need to get rid of alcohol, but at the same time he's like, drinking himself absolutely knee-walking drunk. And so he kind of acts like a fool in public, but women are attracted to him. But then the other thing is, people cannot understand why Rasputin has such a hold on the royal family. Does he have blackmail on him? Does he have dirt on him? And of course, the royal family doesn't want to give away the secret of why he's there. He's basically healing Alexei from this hemophilia. But if we tell, and I think all of this could have been solved by them just telling, telling not only the public, but telling all of Russia and the royal family, for starters, hey, we have a son with hemophilia. The reason Rasputin is here is that he's able to stop the bleeding, and we need to keep him around for that. I think it would have gone a lot better. I think the royal family now being open and vulnerable no matter what country you're in, whether it's like with cancer diagnosis or whatever it is, it seems to make people more they makes them more relatable, and people are more gravitated toward them because they understand what they're going through, whereas just hiding it and just pretending nothing's happening and kind of being like in this bunker mentality, and I know I've said that like for the 5th time now, but really does kind of start to isolate you from everybody. Rasputin is going to be gutted by a noseless woman in Siberia. There's a lot of debate even about her, so get ready for this. She approaches him asking for alms. He goes to give her something. This is back in his hometown, and she pulls out a knife and basically goes into his guts and just yanks up all the way up to like his sternum. And I guess it was a pretty good sized knife because it basically disembowels him almost. He's having to hold in his guts and run as she is pursuing him. And there are 2 different versions of the story, as why wouldn't there be? There's one where he makes such a racket that people come and basically try to beat her to death, and they have to pull her away, throw her in jail. There's another version of the story where he grabs a stick and basically just hits her over the head, knocks her out. And from one source I read, his wife tries to basically put his guts back in him as good as she can, and then it's a 6-hour drive to like the nearest medical facilities, and he's in a wagon for 6 hours and survives, which, number one, like, what a human constitution, I guess. But that's also going to lend credence to the rumors that he has occultic mystical powers. But he's never really the same again. He's going to suffer pain every day for the rest of his life. He does recover, but while he's recovering, Russia's going to enter World War I. He sends a letter begging the Tsar not to do it, saying it's just going to be rivers of blood, Russia's going to end. And some of the prophecies that he had were pretty interesting about that. But the Tsar is going to ignore his advice, and this is something that people don't often talk about, whereas if he's the puppet master pulling the strings, the Tsar supposedly, when he gets a letter, just shreds it and then mobilizes, keeps the mobilization going for World War I. So it really doesn't, to me, if the Tsar is Rasputin's puppet, he would do whatever he said, but in this case, he ignores him. They actually said when the Tsar and the Tsarina appear on the balcony after they've announced they're going to war, all the crowd gets on their knees and basically raises a prayer of thanksgiving to the Tsar and the Tsarina. They are incredibly popular at the time, and unfortunately, the war goes badly for Russia. The Tsar decides to go to the front to take charge. Rasputin begs him not to do it, says it's not going to go well, it's not going to turn out well, and unfortunately he ignores him, and now the Tsar is blamed for everything that goes wrong instead of the generals. And the Tsarina now is going to be taking things over on the home front in St. Petersburg. They name it Petrograd and change it because it sounds a little too Germanic. It's crazy in World War I that everything German, it was a hysteria to the point where German was actually the number 2 language in the U.S. up until World War I. In this anti-German hysteria, anybody who spoke German was considered an enemy agent. It actually basically kind of wipes out German as the second language of the U.S. That's a whole other story to talk about, but they're going to rename all these different things. Sauerkraut becomes like Liberty, cabbage, all this stuff they're trying to do to basically make it where that anything that sounds German is just gone. So they change St. Petersburg to Petrograd. One thing that's really interesting to me kind of going into this is there's a prime minister at the time, Stolpen, as he's going to be known, is really going to kind of crack down on revolution or any ideas in Russia. It got to the point where the hangman's noose was called Stolpen's necktie, and Rasputin and him don't really get along, and I think this is him in this painting. I'm not 100% sure, but there's a guy who is in charge of investigating terrorist activities who actually decides he's going to commit one and is going to end up gunning down Stolpen in a theater. The Tsar was actually there with his 2 oldest daughters, Olga and Tatiana, and they hear what sounds like 2 plates being dropped, and then they're up in like a balcony railing over, I guess, in like the top, and they look down and they see Stolpen like make the sign of the cross. He unbuttons his shirt or his jacket, and as he does, there's just a copious amount of blood, and he ends up dying. And so the daughters actually have nightmares for a long time afterwards about this. And then one thing that was interesting is it's going to be during a production of Rimsky-Korsakov's, and I want to make sure I get this right. It's going to be The Flight of the Bumblebee is actually going to be one of the songs that is played in that piece of music. And so the famous assassination is going to take place here. And we'll come back to that more in just a second, but that's something that I thought was really, really interesting. So give me a second, I'm going to pause, and I'll be right back. I apologize about that. I didn't want all of the papers rustling to be a big deal, but it's the Rimsky-Korsakov's Tale of the Tsar Sultan. It's actually a really good piece of music, and The Flight of the Bumblebee is one of the pieces that is played there. In that, and that's where the prime minister gets gunned down. Here's a picture of, and this is some political cartoon showing Rasputin basically, being the one wearing the crown. Here's one that was done by one of his followers, and this painting just looks creepy, but apparently Rasputin really liked it. And then here's another one with him being kind of the puppet master, and the Tsar and the Tsarina are the ones that are the puppets. It doesn't help that the Tsarina is German, and this is in this incredibly anti-German sentiment in World War I. She hates the Kaiser. She refers to him as kind of a clown, and this is a picture of Rasputin recovering from being gutted here. And so, but unfortunately, everybody views her as kind of a German agent, that she's secretly, pro-German, she's sending information over, and they kind of start giving her all these, she's a German wench. There's one that they names that aren't even proper to say. And so she's now fighting an uphill battle in that regard. Here's the woman who is going to gut Rasputin like a fish. If I saw Lord Voldemort in female form coming toward me, I'd be running the other way, but I am not Rasputin, so what do I know? But there's a lot of debate about this, that some people say that she was an ex-prostitute and she had an STD, and that caused her nose to be eaten away. She insisted that she had some sort of childhood disease that had caused her nose, some medicine she had taken as a child, that had caused her nose to rot away. I don't know either one, but she is going to lose her nose. Here's another picture of Rasputin recovering, and then this is a picture of what she would have looked like, kind of a better picture. But if I saw this coming toward me, you better believe I'm not sticking around to find out. Rasputin is going to continue to make a lot of enemies. There's going to be, at one point he gets kicked out of St. Petersburg. We've already kind of talked about that. Goes back to Siberia. The secret police are following him around and recording everything he did. They gave him the code name, the Dark One, which kind of adds to his legend. And then he and one of the Russian prime ministers, Stolpen, are going to get into a screaming match over something. I'm not sure what it was, but they said it was loud enough you could hear it in the next room. Stolpen comes out, claims he was hypnotized by Rasputin. Whether or not that happens, we'll never know, but it adds to the legend of Rasputin. And Rasputin is going to predict his death. And this is not a personal vendetta where Rasputin basically you're going to die because I've gotten in an argument with you. The story goes that he is in St. Petersburg and Stolpen's carriage drives by him, and Rasputin, I think he was also riding in a carriage or he was walking down the street, one of the two. But he stands up and he points at the carriage and he screams out, "Death! Death is following behind that man." And that night is when Stolpen gets assassinated. So once again, I don't know what Rasputin was on, but he definitely, in some cases, he was right as rain in some points. He also, according to one source I saw, predicted the world was going to end in 2013. So, I mean, he's not, you can't bat 1,000, but in some of his prophecies do seem a little bit off, but there are some that people do even look at today. So Alexander and Rasputin are running the government. This leads to even more rumors that he's running around with her physically, and that all of this is, that they're just having just lovers running around together, creating the government of Russia at the time. The truth is more straightforward and also sad. Rasputin is a way better advisor than he is an administrator. Anytime he would try to do anything government-wise, it just doesn't go well. He was a lot better at advising the royal family on things, I think, than actually administrating. And then Alexander starts hiring and firing people and ministers based off of whether they get along with our friend or not, to the point where they had a checklist where it's either he's a friend or he's not. And she goes through, I want to say it was 5 prime ministers in the 18-month period because they don't get along with Rasputin and his ideas. Rasputin had some good ideas as far as you need to give bread to the poor, you'll keep them from rioting, which is exactly how the Russian Revolution that overthrows the Tsar starts. Don't get into World War I, which that whole war was a mistake, but getting into it was a mistake nonetheless. And then there is a member of the Russian Duma, or parliament, and Nicholas basically is kind of forced into the signing the Duma in 1905 at gunpoint by his uncle, who basically threatens to kill him if he doesn't allow the Duma to exist. Nicholas hates it, but he lets it happen. And there's this fiery speech that's given where Rasputin's the puppet master, he's pulling the strings, and we need to get rid of Rasputin and the Rasputinites once and for all. And he's approached by somebody who actually listened to that speech, and this guy kind of meets up with him, and they decide they're going to try to kill him once and for all. This is where Felix Yusupov is going to come into the picture. A couple of things with him. This is him on his wedding day. His mother wanted a girl, and when Felix was born, she's going to dress him in girl's clothes and treat him like a girl for a long time. And this is going to cause Felix to kind of bat on both sides of the plate, if that makes sense. He is going to marry the Tsar's niece, and I misspelled niece, I do apologize for that. He's an open bisexual, which in St. Petersburg was kind of par for the course in that time. There was a lot of craziness going on in that time period as far as sexual preferences, and marriage was very loose in St. Petersburg. He's going to pretend to be friends with Rasputin to earn his trust. He claims he has some health issues that only Rasputin can help him out with, and then he is going to invite him to his house. Every time he would go over to visit, Rasputin would mention his wife, and I don't know if he was interested in her or just was asking how she was doing, but more than likely he was probably interested. If it's Rasputin, probably more than likely he's interested. He's in bathhouses with women. Women are coming in and out of his apartment all times of the day and night, and so he is going to use his wife as bait, basically. So, this is the story of how Rasputin is going to die, according to Yusupov. He invites him over to the palace, and the plan is that the doctors there's a doctor who's involved with this. Another cousin of the royal family is going to be there, and like we mentioned, that he marries the Tsar's niece, so he's kind of indirectly related to the Tsar. And he's going to invite him downstairs in the Yusupov palace. And the plan is they're going to take wine and cakes, and they're going to lace them with cyanide, apparently enough to kill a horse. And then hopefully the plan is that Rasputin eats these, kicks the bucket, and that's the end of it. So, and this is actually downstairs, I guess. This is kind of this diorama that's been put there, like this display. And so what ends up happening is Rasputin shows up. They put a record on, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and I guess they just keep playing it over and over and over and over again to hide any of the noise from what's about to happen. And so Yusupov shows up, and they're making small talk, and they offer him these cakes, and they offer him this wine, and apparently Rasputin says no at first. He's not really a big fan of sweets at all, and so he's more of a fan of fruits and vegetables, and so he's not really interested. And then I guess he starts guzzling wine down, and then he starts pounding cake after cake, but it has no effect on him. Yusupov is doing small talk with Rasputin for like 2 hours, and as the story goes, and keep this in mind, this whole story probably didn't happen the way that Yusupov says it did, but it fits with Rasputin. His eyes are boring into Yusupov, saying, I know what you're doing, I know you're trying to poison me, I also know that it's not working. And it gets to the point where Yusupov is so startled by this, he goes upstairs like once or twice, each time, with the pretense of getting his wife, who Rasputin was there to see. And each time the guy's like, is he dead yet? And he's like, no, he's just pounding down these cakes and staring at me. And I guess Yusupov gets his gun, and decides, well, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. And so he basically comes back down, waits a little bit longer, and then where this picture is of this guy right here, there would have been a crucifix or a cross, and he basically tells Rasputin to get up, look at the cross, and then he basically says, say your prayers because you're dead. And Rasputin basically, he fires a shot in Rasputin. Rasputin drops down to the floor. Yusupov goes upstairs, they're all running around excited, ding dong, the witch is dead kind of thing. And then Yusupov goes back downstairs because he's like, there's no way that he just folded that easy. He goes downstairs, the lights are all off, I guess there's just candles flickering or whatever, and he kicks Rasputin, which I don't know why you would do this, but he kicks Rasputin. He's still laying on the carpet on the floor, and then he shakes him and says, "Rasputin, Rasputin," and with a roar, Rasputin, kind of opens one eye, looks at him with that, kind of the yellow blue eyes, whichever version of the story you want to hear, and he basically is going to throttle Yusupov and try to kill him. Yusupov is just dumbfounded, panics, and runs upstairs screaming for help, and when they come back down, Rasputin's gone. Which I would be like, I'm gone, I'm out of there, like, you could not pay me enough money to stay there. But they go back upstairs, and he had crawled out through, I guess, another door. He's kind of half running, half limping, screaming that he is going to tell the Tsarina. And obviously, if that's the case, they can all say their goodbyes. And so they kind of panic and fire a couple of shots, into his back. He falls. They grab him, and Yusupov, I guess, in a fit of rage, is like kicking him, screaming, jumping on him, and kind of like beside himself. And there's kind of an urban legend that goes around, and not to get into the details of it, but there's a urban legend that Yusupov is going to basically cut off Rasputin's manhood, and it's going to end up basically pickled in a jar. That is not the case. It's a popular story and an urban legend that has gone around, but that is not the case. It didn't actually happen. And so they're gonna basically roll him up in a carpet. They have somebody disguised looking like Rasputin, so it looks like he left. They're gonna roll him up in the back of a car. In a carpet, and then they're going to drop his body into the frozen Nevia River, and they just hope that the current is going to take him out to sea. A couple of days later, they find a boot of Rasputin sticking up through the ice, and then lo and behold, there's the rest of his body. There's a lot of debate on this as well, for a number of reasons. Number one, Rasputin's autopsy was destroyed by Stalin in the communists, when they take over. They want every record of the old regime to be erased, and so the official autopsy report, we don't have it. The best we have is guesswork and pictures. But from what we can tell, and this may very well be Yusupov trying to sell copies of his book, and if so, it's a fantastic story. But more than likely what happened, there was a bullet hole in the front of Rasputin's head. This is where he was murdered, in this palace. This is it's along the river on the other side. It's a really beautiful palace. This is not the best picture, but you can see the riverbank and one of the planks that was used to retrieve the body. There's the bridge right there, and that's what Rasputin looked like. The crazy part to me is they tied him up. You can see they tied his feet, kind of hog-tied him, wrapped him in that carpet. He somehow broke free of his hand bonds, and there's a couple of different versions of the story. And once again, we don't have the official autopsy, so we don't know. There supposedly was water in his lungs, which would lead to believe that he was still alive when he was in the river. Some people say that there was, some people say that there wasn't. Some people say he was able to punch through the ice before he expired and died of hypothermia. Some people say that he didn't. Either way, this guy is notoriously hard to kill. It very well could be, too, that he was shot in the head and then shot a couple of times in the back, and then just that he just dropped, and they wanted to make this story of like Rasputin, this guy that he's so demonic he can't even cheat death. That death has to like really work overtime to get him. It's incredibly hard to know, but the story has stuck. One thing I did want to mention, I thought you would find this interesting. They did a movie in the 1930s about Rasputin, and he's the reason why we have, whenever you see in movies like this work is a work of fiction, any similarity to all characters living and dead is entirely coincidental. You'll see that on movies. She is going to sue because in the movie it says that she was seduced by Rasputin, and she said that never happened. It goes to court. I think they ended up having to settle for it or something. And ever since then, whenever you see in the movie this work is a work of fiction, all characters, it's living or dead, is there's no similarity to any characters living or dead, and anything related is coincidental. That's going to be what's going to happen so Rasputin is the reason why that shows up, that disclaimer, in every movie, even though like an Avengers movie, which is crazy to me. Here's a better picture of Rasputin. The royal family is really upset about this, as you can kind of imagine. Not only because the girls kind of see him as almost like a priestly type figure. Alexei sees him as like like an uncle, and also helps him with his hemophilia. And then I do think that Alexandra had to probably wonder who's going to take care of our son now. And I'm sure that had to be a really kind of a tough situation. Rasputin seemed to understand his death was coming. Matter of fact, he wrote a letter, and I have it here. Some people say that he mailed it to the Tsar and the Tsarina. Other people say that it was given to him. Once again, there's just so many versions of Rasputin's life that it's so hard to know where the truth ends and the fiction starts. But here's what he said, and I thought this was really interesting. In December of 1916, he basically really starts to get weighed down by this belief he's not going to make it to the new year, which ends up happening. He's going to die before the end of 1916. But he's convinced that if he makes it to January, he'll be fine. If not, then he's dead. And he sends this message, and there's a lot of debate as to whether this message is real or not, but it's something that has kind of stood with the myth of Rasputin. I feel that I shall leave life before January 1st. I wish to make known to the Russian people, to Papa the Tsar, to the Russian mother, the Tsarina, and the children, what they must understand. If I am killed by common assassins, and especially by my brothers, the Russian peasants, you, the Tsar of Russia, will have nothing to fear for your children. They will reign for hundreds of years. So he's basically saying if it's any member of the peasants, you'll be fine. But if I am murdered by the boyars, the nobles, upper class, and if they shed my blood, their hands will remain soiled with my blood for 25 years, and they will leave Russia, which is going to be what ends up happening to Yusupov. He ends up fleeing and dies in France. Brothers will kill brothers, which is kind of a prophecy of the Russian Civil War. They will kill each other and hate each other, and for 25 years there will be no peace in the country, which I thought was really interesting. 1916 plus 25 is going to be 1941, which is when Hitler invades the Soviet Union. So really interesting if this is true. The Tsar in the land of Russia, if you hear the sound of the bell, which will tell you that Gregory has been killed, Rasputin, you must know this. If it was your relations who have wrought my death, then none of your children will remain alive for more than 2 years. And if they do, they will beg for death, as they will see the defeat of Russia, which happens with the Communist Revolution, see the Antichrist coming, which I'm not sure if he's referring to Lenin or Stalin here, which very well could be Stalin, plague, poverty, destroyed churches, and desecrated sanctuaries where everyone is dead, which that does happen under Stalin. The Russians are, you will be killed by the Russian people, and the people will be cursed and serve as the devil's weapon, killing each other everywhere. 3 times for 25 years they will destroy the Russian people and the Orthodox faith, and the Russian land will die. So that's 75 years, which 1916 plus 75 is 1991, which the collapse of the Soviet Union, if that is true, once again, it's incredible if this is the case. I shall be killed. I am no longer among the living. Pray, pray, be strong, and think of your blessed family. Which, if that is true, and once again, if 1/10 of Rasputin's life is true, insane. So he pens a letter to the royal family and lays out a prophecy for what will happen if he's killed, and we just read that. The conspirators in the Rasputin's death. You have the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, he's a cousin to the royal family. We've already mentioned Yusupov. The State Duma deputy Vladimir Purishkevich, and then physician Lazovir, which is going to be Stanislav Lazovert, I do apologize on the pronunciation, are going to be the ones who are involved with this. The physician's the one who supposedly has enough cyanide in these cakes and wine to poison a horse, and a couple of horses, and Rasputin's just eating them like it's no big deal. If I had to guess, based off of what people said with the autopsy report, there was no evidence of cyanide found in Rasputin's body, which leads to 2 very interesting theories. Number 1, Rasputin's body just absorbed the poison, which, if that is the case, is nuts. If they truly did put cyanide in, or probably more likely they didn't. Even Rasputin's daughter said that her father was not a big fan of sweets and would not have been gobbling up cakes. He liked, once again, a lot of fruits and vegetables. That was kind of his thing. It's hard knowing. It's really hard knowing. It's a fascinating story. And then there's a lot of debate as to whether Rasputin died of hypothermia, whether he was dead when they loaded him into the car and threw his body over the bridge. There's a ton of debate about that. His body is buried because they found it. We showed the picture of what it looked like. And a mausoleum is made. And as you can imagine, when the royal family is overthrown in the Communist Revolution and the Russian Revolution, the building is torn down and Rasputin's body is burned. But apparently Rasputin wants to get one last laugh in. They said that when the body was burned, the muscles contract and he actually sits up in the fire, which I can tell you right now, if I was sitting there and I was watching this and he sits up, I would be like Wile E. Coyote through the wall, through the house. I don't care. Like, I am out of there. And so even though that one is easily explained away just by, muscles contracting with the heat, I still would not be there. But Rasputin is going to go down as one of the crazier characters, and if the prophecy of them not being around for 2 years was written by him, it is accurate. The Tsar is forced to abdicate, and this is something we'll have to probably delve into more later on. I know I'm skimming a lot of the highlights here, but he and his family are virtual prisoners. They're moved from place to place, and eventually all of them are going to end up being brutally murdered at Yekaterinburg, And once again, that's the name, Yekaterin, is going to be the name that Alexandra was going to take, and she's is going to change her mind and go to Alexandra, which is just crazy to think about. That whole story is so sad to me. Alexei's actually going to be the one who takes the longest to die, ironically enough. They kind of butcher the job. They end up butchering him. All of the royal family is going to be wearing diamonds in their clothes, and so the bullets are kind of bouncing around the room, and instead of this taking like a minute or two to kill all of them, it takes like 20 minutes, and Alexei's the one who takes the longest, which to me is so sad because he's not going to survive. He's a hemophiliac. They actually have to shoot him basically twice in the head, point blank, before he dies. We'll have to. I do want to do an episode on the Russian royal family, so I'm not going to dive too much into everything that happened, but they are going to be gunned down. And then Lenin and the Bolsheviks do not admit to killing the whole family for 8 years. They say just the Tsar died and that the royal family is safe. Which leads, as you can imagine, to all sorts of rumors about some of them, all of them surviving, some of them getting away, and of course probably the most famous is going to be Anastasia. There was actually one or two guys who pretended to be Alexei, but realistically, if Alexei is going to get a bleeding episode just from getting bumped in a carriage or getting in and out of a boat, the odds of him, even if he got bayoneted once and running away and surviving it, are slim to none. Matter of fact, he sleds down the stairs in a kind of acting out when he's a prisoner, he just really wants to do something and sleds down the stairs, and he's actually in a wheelchair for a while before his death. He actually is being held by his father when they go into the room where they end up getting murdered, and there's a chair for him. And this leads to the idea that some or all the siblings may have survived. Two of them are going to be buried in a separate place. From what we can tell, it's either Maria or Anastasia and Alexei. Alexei's going to be with one of his sisters, and they're buried in a completely different spot. The crazy part is, one of the guys, goes and he finds one of the Tsarina's fingers that has been cut off to get the rings off of it in the room, and all the plaster being destroyed. And he actually says, "I think they've all died." And he gets shunned by a member of the members of the royal family who have escaped or survived because they don't want to believe that the Tsar's family has not made it. And so that's the part that's kind of interesting to me, is you have a little bit of both things where everybody wants to believe they're still alive, and also Lenin basically for 8 years doesn't even admit that they're dead. The thing that's crazy to me is this is not unusual among the communists. When Hitler gets killed at the end of World War II, Stalin has the body shipped to him, what's left when they find it. I think it's just like the part of the skull and the jawbone, or the teeth. And he would actually ask the Allies, "Have you found Hitler yet? Where is he? He probably fled to South America. He could be anywhere by now." He's the one fueling rumors when he knows where Hitler's body was. And Lenin does the same thing here, where they don't admit to killing the whole family, and kind of lead this myth that becomes very, very popular, that Anastasia survived, or one of the royal daughters, or Alexei somehow survived. The one thing that was really interesting to me is the royal family is actually brought through Rasputin's hometown as prisoners. He actually said that you someday will see my village, but you're not going to do it willingly. And I thought that was really interesting, because Nicholas actually writes about it in his diary, that they had to change horses in his hometown, and that basically they are going to stare at Rasputin's family through the windows. When the royal family is shot, the daughters are wearing amulets or like lockets with an image of Rasputin around their necks. So even in their death, Rasputin is still there, which is wild and kind of a fitting place to end all of this with Rasputin. So here's a picture of Olga. She was with, this is the last picture that we have of Alexei. He was only 13 when he dies. And Olga and the mother are actually going to be wheelchair bound by the time they're killed, which is just sad. And this is a stone that was erected outside of Rasputin's house in Praskovia. And basically, this is written in Tsar Nicholas II's journal, that he said that we changed horses here. We were outside of Rasputin's house, and basically, like, the family stared at us through the windows, which is just fascinating. This is where they're going to meet their end, unfortunately, in Yekaterinburg, and then, kind of in Siberia. And then a church was built over the spot where they were killed, which the Savior of the Spilled Blood. Not to be confused with the one that is in Saint Petersburg. So I think it's just Spilled Blood, a Church of the Spilled Blood. This is the inside of it. You can see here kind of icons. And then I think this is Nicholas II and Alexei. They're canonized as saints. Matter of fact, the whole family, and you can see, oops, let me go back. They are canonized as saints. And you can go visit this church in Yekaterinburg and see some of the thing, that was built on the site where they're going to end up being murdered, which is just fascinating. Then a couple of random memes real quick, because why not? We've talked about some kind of heavy stuff here, but you have Russian assassins, how are you not dead? You have Rasputin, I have no idea. And then this one cracks me up, Vladimir Puraskinevich, and I'm probably butchering it, and Felix Yusupov when Rasputin is still alive after drinking poison, being beaten and shot 3 times. How are you not dead? I have no idea. And then world leaders during World War I, and then whatever Rasputin was doing. And then Russia's greatest love machine. You have Putin and then Rasputin. One thing that's really interesting is Putin's grandfather actually did meet Rasputin. He was a chef, and he served for the Tsar, Rasputin, Lenin, Stalin, and I think he died either after Stalin or during Khrushchev's rule. I don't remember. But his name was Spiridon Putin, and he actually met Rasputin at one point, and Rasputin gave him a gold coin, gold ruble, and they kind of bonded over the fact that they both had similar sounding last names. I guess it was not very common, and of course, both Putin and Rasputin are very common now. You have Rasputin according to the song, and then what Rasputin actually looked like. I thought that was pretty great. And then Russians poison Rasputin. Rasputin doesn't die, the Russians. So anyway, I started blasting. And then you have the Russian nobles poison Rasputin. Rasputin doesn't die. Shoots Rasputin. Rasputin doesn't die. Attempts to drown Rasputin. He ends up dying of hypothermia instead. Just absolute insanity. Thank you so much. I know this is incredibly long and a very in-depth look into Rasputin's life, and I barely touched the surface. I know the more you know about history, the more you don't know about it. I've said that a lot. I do apologize. I know I've probably left a lot of stuff out. Thank you so much if you've made it all the way to the end. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I tried to be as honest as I could, to try to be as unbiased and thorough, and thank you so much. A couple of books that I'd recommend if you're interested. Douglas Smith probably has the most middle-of-the-road approach, and he looks at some of the myths of Rasputin and breaks it down, but it's a book I've read, would recommend. Keep in mind, anything that I recommend about Rasputin, there's going to be some stuff in there that I don't agree with. There's going to be some R-rated content in there, so just be careful with it. But this book is definitely a recommended one. This one is on my wish list. I have not gotten to it yet. It just came out fairly recently, but you have Rasputin and the Downfall of the Romanovs by Anthony Beaver, and he's a very good historian. And it's probably, this book is one that is definitely on my wish list. I've not read it yet, but Anthony Beevor is a very good historian. And then if you're interested in learning more about the royal family, and Rasputin, of course, and his influence, Robert Massey has written some good books. Nicholas and Alexandra is one that I would recommend. They're very detailed, in some cases almost overly detailed. But if you enjoy, and it really kind of humanizes Nicholas and Alexandra and doesn't make them into just kind of two-dimensional figures, and the daughters and Alexei as well. Definitely would recommend it. And then if you want to learn more about the daughters, the Romanov Sisters by Helen Rappaport is a really good read about the lost lives of the daughters of Nicholas and Alexandra. They're often overshadowed by their parents, by Rasputin, and by their brother, but they were very fascinating women in their own right. And I think if they had lived today and were like, the crown princesses of the UK, they would have done quite well for themselves. They were very, very interesting and very fascinating. And if you ever get a chance, I've read this book and would recommend it. And then Robert Massey, The Romanovs, the final chapter of how they end and up as prisoners and end up dead, is a fascinating read too. Douglas Smith, who wrote the book on Rasputin, said this: "To separate Rasputin from his mythology, I came to realize was to completely misunderstand him. There is no Rasputin without the stories about Rasputin," and that is 100% accurate. I do think that some of these stories happen, some of them probably did not, but Rasputin is probably the character where myth and people believing the myth is more closely entwined around him than around anybody else. And it's just a fascinating, fascinating read. A couple recommended YouTube channels real briefly here. The Romanovs, this is a very fascinating, it's a very long video, but it's 100% worth it. The Real History of the Roman Dynasty. And the later ones, of course, talk about the Nicholas and Rasputin. And I would just type in that search in YouTube and it'll pull up. People profiles, you have, of course, Rasputin, Nicholas II, etc. Some of the characters we've talked about. And then History Hit has a really good piece on him, 300 Years of the Romanovs. There's actually a whole episode on Rasputin, really fascinating. And then you have Rasputin, Extra History. Killing Russia's Most Hated Man by Primal Space is a really good, and it goes into more detail than I did about how supposedly Rasputin dies. And then The Russian Revolution by Oversimplified. There's part 1 and part 2. Oversimplified is a great channel. Once again, with these channels, I don't recommend just because I recommend it doesn't mean I agree with everything on it, but they're really fascinating if you want to dive more into this. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I know this one went longer than even the first one. Was not expecting it to, but Rasputin's just a fascinating character. And feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Suggestions, episode ideas, critiques, always welcome. And I will try to look through each email and try to respond to them. If I don't, just know that I will read them. And I'm super thankful for each and every one of you. And especially to my former students. You guys have been far and away bigger blessings than you'll ever know. I miss teaching you guys so much, and this is just a small way of giving back. It's not really much at all, but I'm just so thankful and so privileged to be able to, have gotten to teach you guys, and just to see you growing and maturing and moving on in your lives it's so cool to see, and I'm just so thankful for you all. Thank you all for listening and being here. Really do appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me at steeplesandsteel@gmail.com. I know this is only the second episode, so I'm going to try to tweak some stuff, and not every episode is going to be this long, I promise. Just got kind of carried away with some of the research on Rasputin, and like I said, there's a lot I missed, a lot I didn't get a chance to cover, but hopefully you get to see some of the cool, the crazy, and the weird of Rasputin. And last thing real quick, do you think that Rasputin was he a moron? Was he a manipulator? Or was he truly like a mastermind? Feel free to leave comments down below. I will definitely look at them. And thank you so much for watching and listening. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you have any ideas, like episode ideas or things that you'd like to talk about, or maybe people to have on this, I do want to kind of do some podcast side of this as well and work toward that. Thank you so much for being here. Greatly appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to meeting up with you guys soon for another episode. And I'm also going to try to work on the next one for starters to not move back and forth from the mic as much. I got to figure out a place where the mic kind of stays and it doesn't fade in and out as much. But thank you guys so much. And if there's anything I can pray for you about or anything that you have any questions that I can answer, or if there's anything that I did wrong or said wrong, please let me know, and I will try to improve on that for next time. Have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.